Somewhere out there, a group of people have sat down over the past 30 years and written down every single mistake in The Simpsons. Not the big ones, all of them, roughly 2,500 of them, cataloged and sorted and filed away like evidence. And the categories they invented to sort it all are my favorite part. There's one called continuity mistakes, which you'd expect. There's one called revealing mistakes. There's one called deliberate mistakes, which means somebody had to sit there and decide which errors were jokes. And there's a category just for plot holes, which for a show that's been running since 1989 feels a bit like keeping a category for rain. So that's what we're doing tonight. Colors that change between shots, voices coming out of the wrong mouths, backgrounds that are upside down, signs that spoil their own episodes, and the reasons behind all of it, which turn out to be more interesting than the mistakes themselves. If you want more of this sort of thing, there's a subscribe button somewhere down there. That's the whole pitch. Let's get into it. I want to start with the mailbox, not the couch, not the chalkboard, not Lisa's saxophone solo, or Bart on the skateboard, or any of the bits everybody actually remembers. I want to start with the mailbox at the end of The Simpsons driveway, which has been sat there in the background of the opening titles for over 3 decades, and which is wrong. Here's the thing about American mailboxes. They have a little metal flag on the side, and that flag goes on the right when you're looking at the box from the front. That's not a style choice. That's just where it goes, on every mailbox, in every town, because the postal carrier is driving on the right side of the road and needs to see it from the car. And the flag on the Simpsons mailbox is on the left. I never noticed this, not once in a couple of thousand hours of watching this show. And now I can't watch the opening without my eye going straight to it, which I suppose is what happens when you make a video like this one. But that's the fun of the title specifically. It's the single most watched 30 seconds of animation in television history. It's been broadcast more times than almost any other piece of moving image ever made. And it's got mistakes baked into it that have been playing on a loop for 30-odd years without anyone at the network deciding to go back and fix them. Take Bart's skateboard. When Bart comes flying out of the school doors at the start of the sequence, his board is green and it's flat. Completely flat deck, no kicktail, no stripe, nothing. Then, a few seconds later, when he's weaving through the crowd on the pavement and past the people waiting at the bus stop, the board has an orange stripe running down the middle of it, and the back end is raised up. It's a different board. Now, I love this one because there's a whole little argument attached to it. Somebody submitted it to one of the mistake databases, and somebody else came along underneath and pointed out that time passes between the school shot and the pavement shot. So technically, Bart could have swapped boards. Which is a defense. It's not a good defense, but it is a defense. And the idea that grown adults have gone back and forth about whether a cartoon boy had time to change skateboards is exactly the energy I want for this video. While we're in that same shot, there's another one. In the wide angle where Bart skates out of the school, if you look at the ground, you can see a bit of the sky in it. Just a patch of it, sitting there on the pavement where it has no business being. That's a compositing artifact, and it only really shows up in the original 4x3 version of the sequence, which is a detail that becomes very important later on in this video for reasons I'll get to. Then there's the garage. Homer comes home, gets out of the car, and there's a wide shot of him turning around and doing the scream. In that wide shot, look at the area to the right of the garage door. There's nothing there. Empty floor. Then he runs through the garage a moment later, and there are 2 boxes sitting there. They just turn up, nobody carried them in. They exist in one shot and not the other, and they've been doing that since the early 90s. And here's a fun detail about that one. That version of the sequence, the one with the phantom boxes, ran from season 2 all the way through to season 20. So those boxes appeared out of thin air roughly 400 times before anyone changed the titles. The car itself has a couple as well. Maggie's car seat is a light purple color when you first see it, and then in the wider shot of her and Marge, it's gone a sort of burgundy. Not dramatically different, but different enough that once you've clocked it, that's it. You're stuck with it. And back at the very start, in the supermarket, there's Marge's trolley. It's gray with a red handle when Maggie goes through the checkout. Then Maggie pops out of the bag a second later and the handle has gone turquoise. That one always makes me laugh a bit because of what else is happening in that shot. Maggie gets scanned at the checkout and the till reads $847.63. And that number wasn't random. The story goes that it was roughly what it cost per month to feed and look after an average American baby at the time, which is a properly good gag, quietly buried in a sequence nobody was meant to be pausing. Except the show then contradicted its own gag. Years later, in the 138th episode special, Troy McClure tells the audience that Maggie actually scans as NRA Forever, which is also a good gag. It's just a good gag that directly overwrites the earlier good gag. The show made a joke, then made a joke about the joke, and in doing so made the first joke wrong. That, more than anything else in the opening titles, is a decent summary of what we're dealing with here. This is not a show that treats its own past as sacred. One more before we move on, because it's a lovely one and it involves a couch gag. There's a long couch gag from Lisa's First Word, where the family starts off dancing in a line and it slowly turns into an entire circus with elephants and men dancing around fire, the whole production. It's one of the most elaborate ones they ever did. And in the middle of all that, if you look at the little shelf under the lamp and the telephone, in the gap between Homer's right leg and the dancing woman next to him, there's a pile of books. And as the camera starts pulling back, one of the books, the orange one on the left, turns purple. Somebody found that. Somebody sat there in a shot with dancing elephants and fire in it and looked at the books on the shelf. Honestly, I've got a lot of respect for that. Since we're already standing at the front door, we may as well go all the way back to the beginning, because season 1 is where the show was at its absolute wonkiest, and there is a lot to talk about. If you've not gone back and watched season 1 recently, it's a strange experience. Everyone's a slightly different color. Homer's eyes are too far apart. Bart's head is a bit too big for his body and his hair sits wrong. Marge's hair moves like it weighs something. The line work wobbles. Characters drift a few pixels while they're standing still because they were drawn by hand on paper by people who are still working out what these characters were supposed to look like from one frame to the next. And I want to say up front that I love it. There's a texture to those episodes that the show has never got back. It looks handmade because it was handmade. But it also means season 1 is absolutely riddled with errors, and some of them are properly good. The Christmas episode is the obvious place to start because it's the first one that aired, and it's got at least 3 worth talking about. Right near the end, Homer brings home Santa's little helper, and Homer and Marge have a hug. Lovely moment, warm ending, and if you look behind them, the background is upside down, not slightly askew. Upside down. There's a picture hanging on the wall that's inverted, and there's a lamp that appears to be growing out of the ceiling. Then the shot changes and everything is the right way up again. I find this one genuinely funny because of how it must have happened. Somebody put a background plate in the wrong way round, and then a room full of people watched the episode and signed it off, and it went out on national television as the first ever full-length Simpsons episode, which is a hell of a way to start. Same episode, earlier on there's the breakfast scene. The family are sat around the table and they've all got glasses of orange juice. And across the scene, those glasses keep vanishing and coming back. Not all at once, just sort of drifting in and out of existence as the shots cut around. It's one of those errors you can only really see if you've got the episode paused and you're going back and forth, which is exactly the sort of behavior this video is designed to encourage. And then there's Louis. Louis is one of Bart's classmates, and he's black. In the shot at the shopping center where Bart stood with Milhouse and Louis watching Homer do his Santa routine, Louis is colored correctly. Then there's a cutaway to Milhouse daring Bart to pull the beard off, and when we come back, Louis has turned yellow. Now that's a coloring error, and coloring errors happen constantly on this show, as we'll get into properly a bit later. But this particular one is a bit more noticeable than a book going purple because the whole point of the yellow skin thing is that it's the default. Yellow is what you are on this show if you're not something else. So when a character who's meant to be an exception gets colored as the default, it stands out in a way that a wrong colored jumper doesn't. Let's move to episode 3, Homer's Odyssey, because it's got two beauties and they're both in the same bit. Homer poses for a photograph in front of a road sign. The sign reads, "Sign ahead." Then we cut to the photograph itself immediately afterwards, and the sign in the photo has changed shape. Different outline entirely. And the speed limit sign that's also in the frame has gone from 25 to 55. So the photograph is not a photograph of the thing we just watched happen, which, when you think about how photographs work, is a fairly fundamental problem. Same episode, there's a school trip around the power plant. And at one point, one of the twins, Sherry or Terry, loses her entire body. Just gone. Her head is floating in midair next to her sister. No neck, no shoulders, nothing holding it up. There's something about the twins specifically that seems to break the animation. They come up again later in this video for a different reason entirely, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Two identical characters standing next to each other, always in the background, always in group shots. That's a recipe for something going wrong. Now, I want to talk about the voice ones, but I want to be fair about them because I don't think all of them count. In Homer's Night Out, which is episode 10, there's a bachelor party. And two things happen in quick succession that will sound very odd to anyone who's watched this show for any length of time. The first is Carl. This is Carl's first ever appearance, and he's voiced by Harry Shearer, doing a fairly generic voice. Not the Carl voice. Hank Azaria has been Carl for 30 years, and this isn't him. Then seconds later, Lenny turns up to introduce a dancer called Princess Kashmir. Lenny is normally Shearer, here he's Azaria. And more than that, he sounds almost exactly like Mo, which is also Azaria, and which makes the whole thing sound like Mo has wandered into the wrong scene. So the two of them are swapped. Carl has Shearer, Lenny has Azaria, and it's the wrong way around from everything that came after. Here's why I'm hesitant to call it a mistake, though. In episode 10 of season 1, Carl and Lenny weren't characters yet. They were background blokes at the power plant with a couple of lines. Nobody had decided who they were, what they sounded like, or which of the actors owned them. The show was still assembling itself in public, so calling this an error is a bit like calling a first draft a typo. What I will say is that it's jarring now. Knowing what those two became and how much of their comedy comes from the specific pairing of those two voices, going back and hearing them the wrong way around is properly disorienting. We'll come back to the voice thing later on because it kept happening well past the point where it could be excused as the show finding its feet. But the strangest thing about season 1 isn't anything that actually made it to air. It's an episode that almost took the whole show down with it before a single frame had been broadcast. Some Enchanted Evening was the first episode of The Simpsons ever produced. It was meant to be the first one broadcast too. That was the plan. It's the one where Homer and Marge go out for a night on the town and leave the kids with a babysitter who turns out to be a wanted criminal. Perfectly good premise. Nice, contained, easy to follow. Exactly what you want for a debut. It aired dead last at the end of season 1, months after everything else. Here's what happened. Animating a weekly cartoon in America is expensive, and it was expensive in 1989 as well. So the production did what nearly everyone in the industry did, which was to send the labor-intensive part overseas. Character and background layout got done in Los Angeles. Everything after that, the in-betweening, the coloring, the filming, went to a studio in Seoul called ACOM. That split is the single most important thing to understand about why this show has mistakes in it. And I'm going to spend a whole section on it in a minute, so I won't get ahead of myself. For now, all you need is the shape of it. The drawings that define the movement get made in one country. The thousands of drawings in between those get made in another, based on written instructions. So the first episode goes out to Korea, comes back, and gets screened for the production staff at the Gracie Films bungalow. And James L. Brooks, who is one of the most decorated producers in American television, and the reason this show got made at all, watched it and said 3 words. I'm not going to say the middle one, but it rhymes with hit. and it wasn't a compliment, after which apparently the room more or less emptied. What followed was a proper row. Brooks against Gabor Chupo, who ran Klasky Supo, the domestic animation studio handling the show at that point. And Chupo's position was that there was nothing wrong with the animation at all, and that if there was a problem here, the problem was the writing, which I have to say takes some nerve. Telling James L. Brooks his scripts are the issue is a bold move in any room. The producer's actual complaint wasn't really about competence. It was that the animation didn't have the style they had in their heads. Klasky Supo were still animating it like the Tracy Ullman shorts, loose and rubbery and cartoony. ACOM were working from that same loose material without a clear sense of what the finished thing was supposed to feel like. And the result was an episode that looked like a cartoon, but not like this cartoon, so they fixed it. Or rather, David Silverman fixed it. Silverman is a name that's going to come up more than once tonight. He's the bloke who's largely credited with working out the actual rules for drawing these characters. When something difficult needs animating, he's the one they call. And he took on the retakes for this episode. His own estimate is that around 70% of the episode had to be redone. 70%. Most of it was backgrounds, but that's still an enormous amount of work to throw away and start again on. Very little of what the original director, Kent Butterworth, put together survived to broadcast. And you can see it if you watch the episode knowing this. The animation is uneven in a way that no other episode is uneven. It shifts. There are stretches that feel like they belong to a different production entirely, because they do. You're watching two attempts at the same episode cut together. The knock-on effects were substantial. The premiere had to move. And the only other thing ready to go was the Christmas episode, which by its nature had to air in December. So that became the debut instead, and the whole schedule got rearranged around a production problem. More than that, the producers genuinely considered pulling the plug. The position was, if the next one back from Korea, Bart the Genius, comes back looking like this, we're not doing this. That was on the table. The whole series, canceled before broadcast, over animation quality. Bart the Genius came back with a handful of small problems that were easy to sort out, so they carried on. And it wasn't the last time either. On the DVD commentaries, there's a mention of a season 3 episode when Flanders failed, coming back with what they describe as 1,000 mistakes in it and being a complete mess. 1,000 in one episode. That's not a database entry, that's a production incident. I find this whole story quite steadying, actually. There's a version of television history where that screening goes slightly worse, or where Brooks doesn't have the leverage to demand a full round of retakes, and this thing dies in a bungalow in 1989 with one episode in the can. And instead, somebody rebuilt most of it, and it ran for another 36 years. Anyway, let's talk a bit about how these episodes actually get made, because once you understand the pipeline, about 80% of everything else in this video stops being mysterious. 6 months. That's roughly how long it takes to get one episode of The Simpsons from an idea to a broadcast. Half a year per episode on a show that puts out around 20 of them a season. Which means at any given moment there are 3 or 4 episodes in different stages of construction, being worked on simultaneously by different people who may never speak to each other. Let me walk through it because the stages matter. It starts with an outline, then a first draft written by one person, then the draft goes into the room and the room rewrites it, which on this show has historically meant a group of very funny people pulling a script apart line by line. Then there's a table read with the cast. Then more rewrites, because things that read well on the page often die out loud. Then you get an animatic, which is essentially the storyboard cut together and timed against the recorded dialogue. It's the episode as a rough moving sketch. It's the first point where anyone can see whether the thing works. Then comes layout. Layout is the stage that everyone who works on this show talks about as the killer. It's where the actual composition of every shot gets locked in. Where the camera is, where the characters stand, what's in the background, how the space works. It's slow and it's fiddly, and it's the single biggest time sink in the whole process. And then there are late rewrites because this is a comedy and jokes get replaced right up until they can't be anymore. The budget for all of this, as of figures from around 2011, was somewhere in the region of $5 million an episode, which sounds enormous until you consider that they're making 20-odd a year, and each one takes half a year to build. Now here's the part that explains the mistakes. The work is split across an ocean. Storyboard artists in America handle the key frames, the drawings that define what a movement starts and ends as. That work goes to Seoul, to ACOM, which was founded in 1985 by a man called Nelson Shin. Around 120 animators and technicians there take those key frames and produce everything in between. They do the coloring, they shoot it. The whole thing takes them about 3 months, and then it comes back to America for music and finishing. ACOM have animated well over 200 episodes of this show. Rough Draft Studios and a few others have handled the rest. But the split has been the same since the beginning. And Nelson Shin said something about this that I keep thinking about. When he first saw these characters, yellow, 4 fingers, bulging eyes, he assumed they'd be easy, simple shapes, not much detail. And he changed his mind, and the example he gave was Bart's hair. Get one spike slightly wrong or draw the line slightly too thick, and the whole face stops looking right. Not broken, just off. Which is a much harder problem than complexity because complexity you can see coming. So why do mistakes survive? The honest answer is communication. Once the animatic and the instruction sheets ship overseas, there isn't a live conversation happening. The Korean studio is working from written directions, exposure sheets, prop sheets, color specs, and if any of those directions are ambiguous, there's no one sat next to them to ask. If they genuinely can't work out how something's meant to look and the example that gets given is Krusty's scar from heart surgery, then there's a phone call and a retake gets produced. But that's a formal process with a lag attached, not a bloke leaning over a desk. Now, there's an uncomfortable side to this that I think is worth saying plainly rather than skating past. For a long time, when errors turned up, the American side of the production blamed the Korean side. That's on the record. On the Season 1 DVD commentaries, Matt Groening does it repeatedly. There's one where the bananas came back the wrong color, and the line is something along the lines of, "I suppose they don't have bananas in Korea," which is not a great line. And the practical problem with it, beyond the obvious, is that it's often not accurate. Colors are usually specified in America on the exposure sheets and the prop sheets. An error in a color can enter the process at basically any stage, including the stage where somebody in Los Angeles wrote down the wrong number. Blaming the in-betweeners is easy because they're the last people to touch it. It isn't necessarily where the mistake was made. I'm not going to hammer this point. It's a video about cartoon errors, not a lecture. But you'll notice as we go through that a lot of the mistakes we're about to look at are exactly the kind that come from written instructions being interpreted rather than discussed. And I think that's worth holding on to. The other thing to hold on to is scale. 120 people at one studio working on a 22-minute episode for 3 months, producing thousands of individual drawings. Every one of those drawings is a chance for something to go slightly wrong, right? Let's start with the category that comes out of that split more than any other, which is color. There's a shot in Mr. Plow that I want to describe properly because it's the neatest example of this whole category. Homer's about to take the plow up the mountain to rescue Barney, who he's just buried in an avalanche. It's a fairly serious moment by the standards of the episode. Marge is stood there holding Maggie, who's wearing a little snowsuit shaped like a star, and it's blue. Nice, clear, unmistakable blue. Then the shot cuts away to a mountain goat, which is doing a bit. And when it comes back to the family, the snowsuit is orange. That's it. That's the whole error. But there's something about the specific shape of it that I find delightful, which is that the goat is the culprit. The cutaway is what makes it possible. If those two shots ran together with no break, somebody would have caught it in about 4 seconds. Because a goat wanders through, nobody did, and it's been orange on the way back ever since. Color is the biggest single category of mistake on this show, and it's not close. If you look at how the mistake databases break it down, the overwhelming majority of everything cataloged sits under continuity. And a huge chunk of that continuity bucket is just things being the wrong color from one shot to the next. And it makes sense when you think about where color gets decided. It's specified on paper in one place and applied somewhere else, thousands of times, by a lot of different hands. Every character has a palette, every prop has a palette. And on a show with hundreds of recurring characters, most of whom are background people in crowd scenes, the number of color decisions per episode runs into the thousands. So here's a run through some of my favorites. The Auto Show. Nelson walks up to Bart at the bus stop to take the Mickey out of his guitar playing, and mid-scene his vest and his shirt swap colors. Then they swap back. It happens inside one conversation in one location with the camera barely moving. That's a proper one. Bart's Comet. There's a scene near the end where Flanders is stood outside alone singing Que Sera Sera, waiting to die, having been thrown out of his own bomb shelter by the entire town. And then the townspeople turn up to join him, which is one of the loveliest endings the show ever did. And in that crowd is Apu, who has, after 6 seasons of not being white, become white. I want to be careful with that one because it's the kind of error that sounds worse than it is. It's a mass crowd shot with dozens of characters in it, drawn at speed, and somebody applied the default. But it's still a strange thing to watch happen at the emotional climax of an episode. Now some of these aren't one-offs. Some of them are the show having a long-running disagreement with itself. Springfield Elementary is the big one. The school is yellow in some episodes and white in others. And not across eras either. It sometimes changes color more than once inside a single episode. That went on for years. And here's the bit I like. Rather than quietly settling on one and hoping nobody noticed, the show eventually made yellow the official color, and then went and put a photograph of the old white school on the wall in Skinner's office. So the school was repainted, in canon, retroactively. An error got promoted to a piece of history. That's about the most generous thing you can do with a mistake, and I've got a lot of time for it. Then there's Chief Wiggum, whose hair's meant to be blue. Officially, definitively blue. And it comes out black fairly regularly, almost always in night scenes or scenes set somewhere dark, which tells you something about how it's happening. Somebody's working with a darkened palette for the scene, and the blue drops off the sheet. The twins come up again here too. Sherry and Terry are supposed to be a pale, almost sheet white color. And every so often, in a brief background moment, they turn up yellow like everyone else. Same underlying cause as Lewis in the Christmas episode. The default reasserts itself. A couple more quick ones because they're good. Homer the Mo. Mo's showing Homer a new Malaysian beer he's stocking, which is made of soy sauce. He's holding the bottle, cut to Homer reacting, cut back, and the label on the bottle in Mo's hand is now a Duff label. The beer changed brand between shots without leaving his hand. And back in the opening titles, that couch gag book that goes from orange to purple, which I mentioned earlier and which remains, for my money, the single most impressive spot in the entire hobby. What I'd say about all of this, and I mean it, is that color errors are the ones where I feel the least urge to be sarcastic. Every other category has an element of somebody not thinking. Color is just volume. Thousands of decisions a week made under deadline by people being paid roughly a third of what their American counterparts were making on drawings that flash past in a 24th of a second. The surprising thing isn't that Maggie's snowsuit changed, it's that Homer's shirt hasn't. Color's the easy one to spot though, because it's right there in front of you. The next category is one you don't see at all. You hear it. The strangest one is Ralph. There's a moment in Lisa's Pony where Lisa's riding her new horse past the school, and a few of the kids are sat on the fence watching her go by. One of them says something like, "She really tamed that horse." And Ralph Wiggum, sat next to him, replies, "Yes, but who can tame her?" Now, 2 problems. The first is the line itself. That is not a Ralph Wiggum line. Ralph, by this point in the show, had already settled into what Ralph is. He's not making wry observations about a girl's untamable spirit. He's the one who eats the paste. The second problem is that it doesn't sound like him either. The voice that comes out is deeper, flatter, with a completely different rhythm. It sounds exactly like Nelson Muntz, which, given that Nelson is a bully who would absolutely say something like that, makes me think the line was written for Nelson and somebody animated the wrong kid mouthing it. So it's a double error. Wrong voice on the wrong character saying a line that belongs to a third arrangement entirely, and it went out. That's my favorite of these, but there are others, and the pattern behind them is worth talking about. Brush with greatness. There's a bit where a delivery driver asks Carl why all the donuts are piling up at the plant. Carl answers, and Carl answers in Lenny's voice. Now, I mentioned earlier that Carl and Lenny got swapped around in season 1, and I said I wasn't going to hold that against anyone because neither of them existed properly yet. This one's different. By Brush with Greatness, Carl had been in 7 episodes. 7. The character is established, the voice is established, and it still comes out wrong. And the wrong voice is Harry Shearer again, which is the same actor who did the first mix-up. So somewhere in the process, someone kept handing Shearer lines that belonged to Azaria's character, and nobody flagged it until it was on tape and in the episode. There's a whole category for this in the databases, incidentally. Audio problems. There are well over 150 of them cataloged, and they're not all voice swaps. A lot of them are much simpler. There's one in a season 21 episode, The Greatest Story Ever Doughhead, where Bart is climbing a wall and you can hear him grunting with the effort while his mouth stays completely shut. That's a sync issue, not a casting issue, but it lands in the same bucket. So why does this happen at all? Because the maths of this show's voice cast is genuinely mad. You've got a tiny core group of actors covering an enormous town. Dan Castellaneta, Julie Kavner, Nancy Cartwright, Yeardley Smith, Hank Azaria, Harry Shearer, 6 people. And between them they're voicing not just the family, but Moe, Barney, Krusty, Apu, Chief Wiggum, Ned Flanders, Principal Skinner, Mr. Burns, Smithers, Kent Brockman, Lenny, Carl, Nelson, Milhouse, Ralph, Otto, Comic Book Guy, and dozens more. They record together in a room going down a script, which means Azaria might do 4 different characters in a single scene, switching between them line by line. Under those conditions, lines drifting to the wrong actor is not shocking, it's arithmetic. And on top of that, the cast hasn't been a fixed thing. There was a strike threat in 1998 over pay. Another dispute in 2004 where the cast stopped doing script reads. Harry Shearer briefly left the show entirely in 2015 over a contract before a new deal got sorted. So the booth has been renegotiated and reshuffled more than once across the run. Here's the thing I keep coming back to with the voice errors though, and it's a slightly odd feeling. The color mistakes are funny. A snowsuit goes orange, you laugh, you move on. The voice ones are unsettling in a way I didn't expect, because these voices have been in my head since I was small. I know what Carl sounds like the way I know what my mates sound like. And going back and hearing something come out of him that isn't him produces this genuinely strange little jolt, like meeting someone you know well and finding they've got a different accent. It's not upsetting, it's just wrong in a way that a wrong color isn't. Anyway, let's talk about the things that simply aren't there. Bart's head is gone. Season 10, When You Dish Upon a Star. Homer's walking across a courtroom near the end of the episode, and for about a second, Bart's head isn't attached to Bart. It's not there at all. And because it's not there, you can see straight through to a background character's head sitting directly behind where Bart's head is meant to be, which makes the whole thing look like some sort of accidental horror shot. It's a second, less probably, but it's the kind of thing that once somebody points it out, you cannot watch that episode again without waiting for it. This is my favorite category, and I think it's because of how specific the failures are. Something doesn't get drawn, not the whole character usually, just one bit of them. The War of the Simpsons. Ned Flanders is explaining the alcohol content of his Flanders Planters punch, doing the whole cheerful Ned thing, and for a moment his nose disappears, and his neck goes with it. So you've got Ned's face floating slightly above his shoulders, missing the middle of it. Brush with Greatness again, and this time it's Lisa. Just before she and Bart get in the queue for the H2.UO ride at Mount Splashmore, her eyes vanish entirely. Not closed, not blinking, gone. Blank yellow where her eyes should be, and then they're back. I mentioned earlier that one of the twins lost her whole body in season 1 and became a floating head. This is the same family of error, and it happens far more than you'd think. Somebody's drawing a character, they're working from a model sheet, and a component doesn't make it onto the page. Then there's a different flavor of this, where it's not body parts, but entire situations. Homer Badman. Homer's accused of harassment, the media descend on the house, and at one point a news helicopter comes in low enough that the downdraft from the rotors tips his car over. It's a good gag. It's a proper visual escalation of how bad things have got. And a few scenes later, the car is upright and completely fine. Nobody writes it. Nobody mentions it. It's just back, which is standard for a lot of cartoons where destruction resets between scenes as a matter of course. But The Simpsons generally doesn't work that way. This show tends to let damage stick, at least within an episode, so when it does reset, it stands out. The Girl Who Slept Too Little, Season 17. Homer's down on the field at the end of the episode having a conversation with a baseball player called Buck. Behind him, the stadium is packed, full crowd, every seat. 1 second later, Homer and Marge are leaving in a little baseball golf cart, and the stadium is empty. Completely. 40,000 people have left the building in the time it took 2 characters to walk to a golf cart. I love that one because it's not subtle in the slightest. That's not a missing nose. That's an entire crowd. Bart Gets a Z, Season 21. Mrs. Krabappel confiscates every phone in the classroom. She collects them all up into a Laramie cigarette box, then dumps the box into her desk drawer, which for reasons of her own is full of frogs. Good scene. A few minutes later, there's a shot of the class from her point of view. And every kid has their phone back on the desk in front of them. She's not given them back. The drawer hasn't been opened. They've simply returned, which is honestly the most Springfield thing imaginable. The Bonfire of the Manatees, Season 17. Marge is sat in the car, upset with Homer, and behind her the front door of the house opens, then closes, then opens again across a handful of shots. Nobody goes through it. It's just doing that. And that one connects to something broader that's worth mentioning, which is that the inside of the Simpsons house has never been consistent. This is in the general goofs list rather than tied to a single episode. The archway changes size. What room it leads into changes. The layout shifts depending on what a scene needs it to do. There are fan-made blueprints of that house. Quite a lot of them, and they contradict each other because they have to, because the source material contradicts itself. You cannot draw a floor plan of 742 Evergreen Terrace that satisfies every episode. It's not possible. The house is a set of moods rather than a building, which I quite like. In the end, the house is whatever shape the joke needs. And after 30-odd years, that's arguably a more honest way to design a home than pretending it was ever fixed. Right? The opposite category now. Things turning up when they shouldn't. There are 2 blue-haired lawyers, and I refuse to let this go. Bart Gets Hit by a Car, Season 2. The courtroom sequence. The blue-haired lawyer is stood up talking to Marge, doing his slippery lawyer thing. And behind him, at the table, sitting next to Mr. Burns, is the blue-haired lawyer. Same character, same design, same shot. One of him is standing and talking, and the other one is sat down watching himself do it. And here's the bit that seals it. In earlier shots of that same table, that chair's empty. so he doesn't get quietly written out of the background as an unfortunate reuse. He arrives. At some point between shots, a second one of him turned up and took a seat. That's the best one in the whole video in my opinion, and we're not even halfway through. This category is the mirror image of the last one. Instead of things going missing, you get more of them than you're supposed to have. And almost all of it comes down to crowd scenes. Here's why. This show has an enormous library of background characters. Not just the named ones, but the ones who exist purely to fill up a room. And when you need a courtroom, or a school playground, or a mob, you're not designing 40 new people. You're reaching into the library, which means the same faces get placed over and over, and occasionally 2 of them end up in the same frame, and occasionally one of those is somebody who's meant to be somewhere else in the shot. Much apu about nothing is season 7. Groundskeeper Willie is telling off a group of kids for picking on Uter, who's the German exchange student. Nice bit of business, and in the group shot of the children stood around him, there are 2 Ralphs. 2 of them, right there in the same huddle of kids. Which, and I say this with love, might be the funniest possible character to duplicate. Anyone else, and it's an error. Ralph twice feels like it could be a plot point. Duffless, season 4. Homer's just come back to the bar after a month off the beer, and Moe rallies the regulars with a bit of, "We hate him, right, fellas?" And then it cuts to the 4 blokes at the bar responding. There's Barney, there's Larry, there's Sam, and there's a 4th man who appears to be Larry's identical twin brother, about whom the show has never had anything further to say. Then there are the ones where it's not a whole extra person, it's an extra bit of one. Beyond Blunderdome, season 11. Homer's explaining to Bart how busy he's going to be editing a film with Mel Gibson, and he's got his hand on Bart's shoulder. Then he leans in to whisper to him about how much the movie stinks, and he brings his hand up to the side of his mouth to do the whisper. And the hand is still on Bart's shoulder, both at once, same hand. He hasn't grown a 3rd arm, the original one just never left. And it goes on long enough that you don't need to freeze it. You can see it happening in real time if you know where to look. Marge gets a job, season 4. Bart's being attacked by a timber wolf, and Willie turns up to sort it out. He tears his shirt off, big heroic moment, bare chest, abs, the works. Then he actually starts wrestling the wolf, and he's wearing a gray undershirt. He didn't put it on. The shirt he tore off has quietly been replaced by another shirt underneath the shirt he tore off, which is not how tearing a shirt off works. And there's one more that I think is a slightly different beast, from Bart the Daredevil, season 2. The establishing shot at Springfield Gorge. Nelson asks, "Where is he? I thought he said noon." Standard bit of scene setting. And if you watch Milhouse, who stood next to him, Milhouse has been animated saying that exact line as well. His mouth goes through the whole thing. Then he turns and responds to Nelson, having apparently just said the same words simultaneously and silently. That one's a bit different because it's not a duplicated character, it's a duplicated performance. Somebody animated the dialogue onto the wrong mouth, then animated it onto the right one as well, and both takes made it into the final cut. What ties this whole section together is that none of these are hard to spot. That's the strange part. A missing nose for 4 frames, fine, nobody's going to catch that. But 2 identical lawyers in a courtroom, or a crowd with 2 Ralphs in it, is the sort of thing you'd think would jump out at the first person to watch the finished episode. And it didn't. Which tells you something about how many people are actually looking at any given frame near the end of that 6-month process, and how much of what they're looking at is everything else. But speaking of things sitting in the background, some of the best mistakes on this show aren't drawings at all. They're words. There's a sign outside the church in Homer's Barbershop Quartet that gives away the plot before the plot has happened. Quick recap of the episode, in case it's been a while. Homer used to be in a barbershop quartet. The episode is the story of how they formed, got famous, and fell apart, told as a flashback. And a decent chunk of the fun is watching them work out who they are, including landing on a name. They become the B-Sharps. That happens later in the episode, after some deliberation, except there's a shot of the outside of the church early on where they're performing. And the sign out front already says, also the B sharps. The sign knows. The sign has known this whole time. I find text errors more satisfying than animation errors, and I think it's because they feel like a different kind of failure. A color going wrong is a hand slipping. A sign being wrong means a piece of information traveled through the production and arrived at the wrong stage of the story. Here's how that happens, mechanically. Signs are props. They get drawn to a specification by people working from prop sheets at a point in the process well after the script was written and well before the script stopped changing. So if a joke gets rewritten late, or a scene gets moved, or a name gets decided in the room after the boards went out, the prop doesn't necessarily hear about it. The sign is a fossil of an earlier draft. The B sharps one is almost certainly that. Somebody drew the sign knowing the ending because they knew the whole script, and nobody thought about whether the audience was supposed to know yet. Here's a much simpler one, and it's a good one because it's not really an animation problem at all. The Cartridge Family, Season 9, This Is the Gun episode. Homer's bought a firearm and is being made to wait a few days before he can take it home. And he's pacing around the house at night in a foul mood, muttering. Lisa can't sleep because of it, comes down and tells him it's 3 a.m. And there is a clock in the shot behind her, clearly visible, reading something in the region of 10 to 10. So either Lisa is lying, or the clock is broken, or somebody drew a clock and never checked the dialogue. And what makes it lovely is that it's the sort of detail that only exists because somebody bothered to put a clock in the background at all. If the wall had been empty, no error. The mistake is a consequence of doing more work, not less. The mailbox from earlier belongs in this family too, incidentally. Same species of thing. A real-world detail rendered slightly wrong and then left alone for 3 decades. And that brings me to the factual errors, which is its own category in the databases with around 50 entries in it. These aren't the show contradicting itself. These are the show being wrong about the actual world. My pick is from The Bonfire of the Manatees, Season 17. Alec Baldwin plays a manatee expert. And in the course of being a manatee expert, he says that manatees are also called dugongs. They aren't. They're related. They're both big, gentle sea mammals that people confuse constantly. But they're distinct species with completely different ranges. Manatees live in Atlantic coastal waters and up the Amazon and its tributaries. Dugongs live in the coastal waters of the Indian Ocean and the Southwest Pacific. Different animals, different oceans, which means the joke of the episode, where a celebrity guest star plays the world's foremost authority on an animal, is undercut by the world's foremost authority getting the animal wrong. I'm not annoyed about it. I looked it up because of this video, and now I know the difference between a manatee and a dugong, which is more than I could have said last week. That's a net gain. Now here's the thing that makes this whole category slightly slippery, and it's the reason I've been careful about how I've phrased some of this. There is a category in the mistake databases called deliberate mistakes, about 15 entries in it. And the existence of that category means somebody at some point has had to sit down and decide which of these errors were jokes, because this is a show that puts wrong things on screen on purpose all the time. Misspelled signs are a running gag. Impossible geography is a running gag. Half of Springfield's local businesses have names that don't make sense. So when a sign is wrong, you genuinely cannot always tell whether you've caught the production out or whether you've just fallen for a gag that was aimed at exactly the sort of person who pauses the frame. I think the B-sharp sign is real. The clock is definitely real. But there's a whole gray zone in the middle, and everyone doing this hobby knows it's there. Which is a decent place to leave the animation behind, because the next thing I want to talk about isn't about drawings at all. It's about the show contradicting its own past. There is a gravestone in Springfield Cemetery with Dr. Marvin Monroe's name on it. You can see it in Alone Again, Naturadiddly, the episode where Maud Flanders dies. The camera's at the funeral, everyone's gathered round, and there it is in the background, a headstone, Marvin Monroe. He's not dead. He turns up later, alive, and buys a book. Let me take you through this properly because it's the single funniest continuity situation in the entire show. And it took the production about a decade to fully commit to it. Dr. Marvin Monroe shows up in season 1 as the family's therapist. He's got the beard, the shouting, the electroshock chairs. He's on the radio. He's a proper early days Simpsons character from the era when the show was still a family sitcom with a mean streak rather than whatever it became later. He does a handful of episodes and then more or less stops appearing. Then comes the 138th episode special, hosted by Troy McClure. And there's a trivia question in it. Which popular Simpsons characters have died in the past year? Monroe's name comes up. He's not the correct answer, and the reason given is that he was never popular, which is a good line, and also, in retrospect, a slightly cruel obituary for a man who tried to help this family. But the joke only works if he's dead. That's the premise. He's excluded on the grounds of popularity, not on the grounds of being alive. Then the show doubles down. There's a hospital named after him. Then there's a school gym named after him. Both of those are the sorts of things you name after somebody once they've gone. The show has now 3 separate times told the audience that this man is no longer with us. And then the gravestone, which is not a joke in dialogue or a name on a building. That is a physical object in the world of the show with his name carved into it, sat in a graveyard, in a shot at a funeral. At that point, it is, by any reasonable standard, settled. And then seasons later, Marvin Monroe walks into a bookshop to buy Marge's romance novel, Alive, Fine, Talking. The explanation given, and I want you to appreciate how little effort went into this, is that he had been very sick, not dead, just under the weather for several years, during which time they built a hospital and a gym in his memory and put up a headstone. And the beautiful part is that the show knew. Later on, there's a nod towards him having written a book about the whole episode, which is the production winking at the audience and saying, yes, we know, we're not going to fix it. Here's a joke instead. That's the thing about the plot holes on this show. They very rarely get repaired. They get acknowledged. Right, a couple more in the same vein because Monroe isn't the only one. E-I-E-I-D-O, Season 11. The family end up fleeing a duel of all things and go to hide out at Homer's childhood farmhouse. Lovely setting, whole episodes built around it. Except Homer and Grandpa burn that farmhouse down, on screen. In an earlier episode, Grandpa versus sexual inadequacy. It's gone. It was destroyed deliberately as a plot point. And then, several seasons later, the family drove out and moved into it. Nobody addresses this. It's just there again, in the same way Bart's classmates got their phones back. And here's a subtler one, which I like because it involves the show rewriting a piece of evidence. Brawl in the Family, Season 13. Homer's wife from Las Vegas turns up. Long story, but the short version is that Homer accidentally got married in Vegas in an earlier episode, and there's video footage of the night. She plays the video in front of Marge, and the footage now includes Homer kissing Ned Flanders. That did not happen. Not in the sense of it being off-screen, but in the sense that we watched this exact video get played in the Vegas episode and it wasn't in it. The tape has changed, new material has appeared on a piece of evidence between one episode and another. Which, if you think about it, is a slightly more interesting kind of error than a color going wrong. It's the show revising its own documentary record, and all of these are small compared to the one that fans have been arguing about for nearly 30 years, so let's get into that. Principal Skinner is celebrating 20 years at Springfield Elementary. The whole town's turned out. There's a ceremony, Chalmers is there, Agnes is there, the kids are there, and everyone's making the usual jokes about what a stiff, joyless man Seymour Skinner is. Standard opening. And then a stranger walks in and says he's Seymour Skinner. Here's what unfolds. The man we've known for 9 seasons isn't Seymour Skinner at all. His name is Armin Tamzarian. He was a street kid from Capital City, got himself into enough trouble with the law that he was pushed into enlisting rather than face a sentence. And in the army, he met a sergeant named Seymour Skinner who took him under his wing and straightened him out. Skinner was reported killed in Vietnam. Armin came back to Springfield to break the news to his mother, Agnes. And Agnes, seeing a young man on her doorstep, decided that this was her son. And he couldn't bring himself to correct her, so he stayed for 20 years as him. And the real Seymour Skinner has now turned up alive, having been a prisoner of war for the entire time. The episode is Season 9, Episode 2. It aired on the 28th of September, 1997, production code 4F23. The ending is the bit people forget. Springfield gets the real Skinner for a while, doesn't like him, decides they preferred the fake one, and effectively runs the genuine article out of town. Armin is reinstalled as Skinner. And then a judge issues a ruling that nobody in Springfield may ever mention any of this again, under penalty of torture. Which is, and I mean this sincerely, a very funny ending. The show writes itself a legal instrument for ignoring its own episode. Now, the contradictions. There are a lot, and they're not small. Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass song is the episode where Bart gets him fired and then they become unlikely friends. It's a beloved one. And in it, Skinner re-enlists in the army, and he is addressed as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, which is difficult because if the real Skinner was reported dead, that name is on a casualty list somewhere. The Army does not simply have a second Sergeant Seymour Skinner walk back in and take a posting. Keeping the act up in front of your neighbors is one thing. Keeping it up in front of the United States Army's paperwork is another. Then there's the Curse of the Flying Hellfish from Season 7. That's the one with Abe's old Army unit and the treasure. And in the flashbacks, one of the men in that unit is Sheldon Skinner, Seymour's father. Who looks like Seymour, who acts like Seymour, same posture, same manner, unmistakably the same design. Which is a problem because Armin Tamzarian is not related to Sheldon Skinner in any way. There's no reason on earth those two men should resemble each other. The real-world explanation is straightforward, which is that when they made the Hellfish episode, nobody had thought of the Tamzarian idea yet. Fans have since come up with in-universe explanations, and some of them are quite clever, and I'm not going to pretend any of them are the answer because they aren't. They're patches. And there's a smaller one that I think is actually the most damning. In The Principal and the Pauper, Armin doesn't seem to know who Ned Flanders is. Ned, who lives in the same town, who he'd already interacted with in Badass Song and in the PTA disbands, that's not a timeline problem. That's just the episode not checking. Here's what actually happened afterwards, though, and this is the part I find most interesting. The show ignored it, almost completely. Later episodes have gone straight back to showing Skinner living with Agnes as a child and as a young man, which is impossible under the Tamzarian version, where he doesn't meet her until after Vietnam. Boy Meets Curl goes as far as showing Agnes pregnant with him. There have been the occasional winks, like Lisa calling him by the old name in a later episode, but they're jokes rather than canon maintenance. So the show did exactly what the judge in the episode ordered. It agreed never to speak of this again. I want to be straight with you about where I land on this one, because everyone who talks about this episode picks a side, and I'm not going to. A lot of people point to this as the moment the Golden Age ended. The argument is that it took a character who'd been carefully built up over 8 seasons, gave him depth, gave him a mother, gave him the Edna romance, and then pulled the floor out for a gag. That it made him less sympathetic and more absurd for no gain. I understand that argument completely. I just don't feel it very strongly. What I think is that it's a more interesting episode than it is a good one. It's the show testing whether its own past means anything, in public, on air, and then getting an answer it didn't like. And the answer changed how the show handled continuity from then on. Before this, there was at least a pretense that things stuck. After this, the show became much more comfortable treating its own history as raw material, which, given that we've just spent 5 minutes on a dead therapist buying a book, was probably always where this was heading. Honestly, though, the show contradicts itself in much smaller ways all the time, and those are the ones I like more. Bart Simpson is allergic to shrimp. That's the whole engine of a later episode. Please, Homer, don't hammer him. Skinner works out that Bart has a shellfish allergy and uses it against him, and it's treated as a known, established fact about the boy. Except several seasons earlier, Bart is going on about how much shellfish he's eaten, boasting about it, which is not typically the behavior of someone with a shellfish allergy. And that's not even his only inconsistent allergy, which is where it gets genuinely daft. Back in season 2, Marge mentions that Bart is allergic to butterscotch. Bart, who has never in his life shown restraint around a sweet. And then, several seasons on, Marge says his favorite dish is butterscotch chicken. So he's allergic to it, and it's his favorite. Both stated by his mother, who you'd assume would be across this. I love the food ones because they're so low stakes. Nobody's continuity is ruined. It's just a household that can't keep track of what its own child can eat. There's another in this family that's a bit odd, which is Marge and flying. Season 6 has an episode built entirely around Marge's fear of flying, and it's not played as a mild thing. It's a proper phobia with a childhood trauma underneath it, and the episode doesn't resolve it. It ends with the fear intact, which is strange for a family who have been to Australia and Japan and various other places that are only reachable by aeroplane, both before and after that episode. Now, all of this sits on top of something bigger, and I want to explain it properly because it's the mechanism underneath a lot of what we've talked about tonight. The show runs on a floating timeline. What that means in practice is that nobody ages. Bart has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa has been 8 for the same length of time. Maggie has been a baby for 36 years. The show has run long enough that people have watched the first episode as children now have children of their own who are older than Bart. And that's fine on its own. Plenty of shows do that. The complication is the flashbacks, because the show keeps doing episodes about the past, how Homer and Marge met, how they got married, Lisa's first word. And in order for those flashbacks to make sense relative to a present that never moves, they have to keep getting re-anchored to more recent decades. So Homer and Marge's youth was originally set in the 1970s. High school in the 70s, the whole aesthetic of it. And in later episodes, that same youth has been shifted into the 1990s, because otherwise Homer would have to be pushing 70. The past on this show slides forwards to keep pace with a present that stands still, which means every flashback contradicts every other flashback by design, not by accident. And once you know that, a lot of the contradictions stop looking like errors and start looking like the cost of the format. Not all of them, mind. Some of them are just somebody reaching for the wrong drawing. And Maggie Makes 3, Season 6, has 2-in-1 episode, and they're both the same species. It's the flashback where Marge tells Homer she's pregnant with Maggie, and the shot uses the standard living room background, the one they use all the time, which includes hanging on the wall a portrait of infant Maggie, who has not been born yet, who is, at that exact moment, being announced. And in the flashback where Marge tells him she's pregnant with Lisa, there's a picture of 8-year-old Lisa visible as Homer runs up the stairs. Both of those are layout doing exactly what layout does. Somebody needed a living room, they reached for the living room, and the living room came with its furniture. Now, in fairness to the show, some things absolutely do stick. It's not all mush. Maud Flanders died and stayed dead, and Ned has been a widower ever since. Lisa went vegetarian and never went back, which was a genuine commitment for a comedy show to make. Apu got married and had children. Milhouse's parents split up, and it mattered. So the show can hold on to things. It just holds on to the things it wants to hold on to. Everything else is negotiable, and the fan base argues endlessly about which is which. Carl's background has moved around, Moe's has, Nelson's father has been given more than one story, Apu's nephew, Homer's mother. Which brings me to my honest position on the whole business, and then we'll move on. I don't think any of this is a flaw. I think a show that ran for 36 years with a fixed cast of ages was always going to end up like this, and the alternative would have been worse. If they'd committed hard to continuity in season 4, they'd have had to let Bart grow up and leave, and the show would have ended around 2003. The contradictions are the price of it still being on. Right, let's talk about what changed when the show went digital, because the mistakes changed with it. For the first 13 seasons, this show was made out of physical objects, traditional cell animation. Drawings on paper transferred onto sheets of clear acetate, painted by hand on the reverse side so the paint sits behind the line, then laid over a painted background and photographed one frame at a time. That's how it worked. Everything you're watching in those seasons existed as a stack of physical things in a room, which is why the errors from that era have the character they do. A cell gets laid in the wrong order, and you get a puddle sitting on top of a leg instead of underneath it. A background plate goes in the wrong way round, and Homer and Marge hug in an upside-down living room. A pot of the wrong paint gets used, and a snowsuit turns orange. These are physical mistakes. Somebody's hands did them. The show started testing digital fairly early. There's a season 7 episode, Radioactive Man, from 1995 that was the first proper experiment. Then Tennis the Menace in season 12. And from season 14 onward, starting with The Great Louse Detective, the whole thing went to full digital ink and paint. That change quietly killed off an entire class of error. You cannot lay a digital cell in upside down. Colors get assigned from a palette file rather than mixed, so a character's skin tone can't be slightly off. It's either right or it's a different swatch entirely. Registration errors, where the line work and the paint don't quite line up, just stop existing. A huge amount of what we've been talking about tonight became technically impossible somewhere around 2002. And I'm going to give you an opinion here, which is that I miss it. I don't think digital made the show look worse. The line work is cleaner, the colors are richer, the camera can do things it could never do before. Objectively, it's a better looking product. But it's lost something, and I think what it's lost is evidence of hands. The early seasons look like people made them. The modern ones look like they arrived. That's not a serious criticism. It's just a thing I notice, and I suspect a lot of the affection people have for the classic era is partly about texture, and not entirely about the writing. The next big shift was the frame itself. Seasons 1 through 19 were 4:3, the old square-ish television shape, and that was not incidental to how the show was made. The composition of every shot was built for that frame, and the show used the top and bottom of it constantly for visual gags, signs above doors, things happening at the edges, background jokes tucked into corners that a widescreen frame simply doesn't have. Then season 20 went high definition and widescreen. The first episode broadcast in 16:9 was Take My Life, Please, which went out on the 15th of February 2009. And came with a brand new opening sequence to match. That changeover happened mid-season, which produces one of my favorite bits of home video trivia. The season 20 sets contain episodes in both shapes. Early ones in the old square frame, later ones in widescreen in the same box, because the show changed format halfway through the year, and nobody was going to go back and redo the first half. And then there's a thing that happened in 2019, which is the only item in this entire video that genuinely annoyed me. Disney Plus launched in November of that year with the full run of the show on it, every episode from the beginning. Enormous deal for fans, and all of the older episodes were cropped to widescreen, not letterboxed, not pillar boxed, cropped. The top and bottom of the original frame chopped off to make the picture fill a modern television, which broke jokes, actually broke them, in the sense that the punchline was no longer on screen, signs got cut in half. Background gags disappeared entirely. decades of visual jokes composed specifically for the top and bottom of a square frame were simply gone because the frame had been trimmed to fit a shape the show was never made for. People were not happy about this, and they said so loudly for months. And to be fair to Disney, they fixed it. On the 28th of May, 2020, a 4:3 option came back. You can toggle it in the player under a setting called Remastered. Here's why this matters for what we've been doing tonight, beyond me having a small grumble about it. Some of the mistakes in this video only exist in the original format. That artifact I mentioned right at the start, the patch of sky sitting on the ground while Bart skates out of the school, is a 4:3 problem. Crop the frame, and you may well crop the mistake out of existence. So the archive of errors we've been going through is tied to a specific version of the show. Watch it in the wrong aspect ratio, and some of these simply aren't there anymore, which is a strange thing to think about. Somebody cataloged a mistake that a streaming service then accidentally repaired by damaging the episode in a different way. And here's the part I find quite funny. The show has known people watch it like this for a very long time. It's known, and it's had things to say about it. Comic book guy exists because of people like me. Not entirely, obviously. He's a broader joke than that. But a substantial part of what he's for is to be the man who watches a cartoon frame by frame and then writes in to complain about a continuity error, and to be quietly insufferable about it. And the show's fullest statement on this is the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show from season 8. That's the episode where Itchy and Scratchy are flagging in the ratings, so the producers bolt on a new character, a dog called Poochie, who is focus grouped into existence and is dreadful. It's about network notes and about what happens to a long-running show when it starts panicking about relevance. And it is one of the sharpest things the writers ever did about their own situation. It's also the episode where the show turns around and looks directly at its most devoted viewers. There's a scene where Comic Book Guy declares an episode the worst thing he's ever seen and gets told politely and completely that he was given something for free that he then complained about. And it's not a cheap shot. It's a fair one, and it stings precisely because the writers clearly understood the mindset well enough to defend it and puncture it in the same breath. There's a lovely production detail in that episode as well. When they show the animators at work drawing Poochie, those are caricatures of the actual staff. And one of them is David Silverman, the man who ended up redoing most of the first episode ever made. So the person who fixed the show's earliest disaster is in there, drawn as a cartoon, animating a joke about how cartoons get ruined. Then there's the 138th episode special, which is the show's other big statement on this. The whole conceit is Troy McClure walking the audience through the history of the series and answering viewer questions. And a lot of those questions are exactly the sorts of things people have been writing in about. Continuity gripes, inconsistencies. Why does this not match that? And the answers are almost never answers. They're jokes. That's the format. The show gathers up its own contradictions, puts them in front of an audience, and then declines to resolve a single one of them. That's also the special that overwrote the checkout gag we talked about right at the beginning, which I still think is the funniest thing about it. An episode devoted to explaining the show's inconsistencies introduced a new one. I mentioned earlier that there's a category in the mistake databases for deliberate mistakes. About 15 entries, and somebody has to adjudicate what goes in it. That category is downstream of all of this. It exists because the show trained its audience to look, and then started putting things in the frame on purpose to reward the looking, and now the two behaviors are impossible to fully separate. The production and the audience have been in a feedback loop about this since roughly 1995. Let me give you some scale, and then I want to say the actual thing this video is about. This show holds the record for the longest-running American primetime animated series. It holds it for the longest-running American sitcom by number of episodes. It holds it for the longest-running scripted primetime series in the history of American television, on both seasons and episodes. It holds the record for the most guest stars ever featured on a television series. and it's won more Emmys than any other animated program. 37 seasons, over 800 episodes. All of it built the slow way we went through earlier, going out weekly for longer than most of the people watching have been alive. And the total catalog of mistakes across all of it comes to somewhere around 2,500. Work that out per episode, and it's roughly 3 errors per episode, and most of them are a book going purple or a nose vanishing for 4 frames. That is an astonishingly low failure rate for a handmade object produced at that scale under that much time pressure. If you built anything else that way, a car, a house, piece of furniture, and came back with 3 cosmetic flaws you could only find by freezing time, you'd be delighted. So I want to be clear about what I actually think of the people who catalog this stuff, given that I've spent the last couple of hours being one of them. They're not doing it to be cruel. You cannot find that many of anything out of spite. Spite runs out. What keeps somebody going back to a shot of dancing elephants to check the books on a shelf is affection, and a lot of it sustained over decades. The database is not a list of failures. It's a very long, very odd love letter written by hundreds of people who never met about a cartoon. And I think that's rather nice. Nobody in this town knows when the power plant opened. I want to lay this one out slowly because it's the sort of thing you only notice if you've watched an unreasonable amount of this show, and once you notice it, you start seeing the shape of the problem everywhere. There's an episode called The Blunder Years, Vacation, from season 13. Part of it involves the men sitting around a campfire, reminiscing. And Lenny says something in passing about the nuclear plant having only just opened. Fine. Except in another episode, we're back at Homer's high school, and the guidance counselor is telling him about his future prospects, and part of the pitch is that the power plant will be opening soon. So the plant opened when Homer was at school. And it also opened years later when Lenny was already a grown man working in Springfield. Those are 2 different decades, and both of them are on screen. That's the sort of thing that happens when a town has been backfilled with history across 3.5 decades by dozens of different writers, none of whom were consulting a master document because there isn't one. And here's a related one that I find weirdly satisfying because it's about Homer's actual job. In the early episodes, Homer works on the floor of the plant. He's at a conveyor belt, handling carbon rods. That's his job. He is not a supervisor of anything. Then, in Homer's Odyssey, in season 1, Mr. Burns makes him safety inspector, and that's how he ends up in Sector 7G, sat at the control panel with the 2 buttons and the enormous unattended dials, which is where he's been ever since. Now, And Maggie Makes 3 is a flashback episode. It's set before Maggie was born, which is before all of that. And in the flashbacks, Homer is sat at the control panel in Sector 7G, which he shouldn't be. At that point in his life, he should be down on the floor with the carbon rods. He hasn't been promoted yet, and the promotion is a whole episode, and that episode is one of the first 10 ever made. I like this one because it's a very specific kind of failure. It's not that somebody forgot the rule, it's that Sector 7G has become the visual shorthand for Homer being at work, so completely that it gets used even in scenes set before he ever sat there. The set has outgrown the story. There's more of this. Springfield's geography has the same problem, and the show has had fun with it for years, which makes it hard to separate the deliberate from the accidental. Marge versus the Monorail, which is one of the best episodes anyone has ever made of anything, has a small one in it. Homer grabs the big letter M off the side of the monorail and uses it as an anchor to stop the train, and the M plows through Springfield's oldest tree, which is a lovely gag. But in that shot, there's no monorail track visible, no supporting pylon, nothing holding up the train that is currently attached to the letter he's holding. The infrastructure that the entire episode is about has quietly left the frame. Then there's Lemon of Troy, season 6, which is the Shelbyville episode, and one of the great ones. There's a bit where Bart has to pick between doors marked with Roman numerals to avoid a room full of tigers. He works it out, picks correctly, and gets away. and the Shelbyville kids chasing him can't open the door. There's no lock on it. Nobody mentions Bart jamming it or blocking it or doing anything to it at all. And we see him out on the street a few seconds later, still worrying about the lemon tree, so he clearly didn't stay behind to barricade anything. The door simply refuses to open for the people it needs to refuse to open for. Here's another, and this one's from the very first Christmas-adjacent stretch of proper classic episodes. New Kid on the Block, Season 4. Bart does a prank call to Moe, tells him his name is Jimbo Jones, and gives him an address so Moe will come round and sort Jimbo out. The address Bart gives is 1094 Evergreen Terrace. The Simpsons live at 742 Evergreen Terrace. That's where Bart is. That's where Jimbo is. If Moe had followed those directions, he'd have ended up outside somebody else's house entirely, several hundred numbers down the road, presumably confusing a very unlucky family. He does not. He turns up at the right place because the plot needs him to. And then there's Homer vs. Dignity, Season 12, which has a timing problem so bad that somebody wrote it up as a plot hole rather than a continuity error. There's a parade at the end. Mr. Burns is on a float trying to talk Homer into a prank. And Lisa reads the words on the side of Burns's float long before that float is anywhere near her. Then Burns takes an implausibly long time to get changed into a Father Christmas outfit, during which the parade appears to be moving at whatever speed the scene requires. None of this ruins anything. That's the thing I keep coming back to. You can watch every episode I've just described and enjoy them completely, and I have many times, and the errors sat there the whole while doing absolutely no damage. But there is something quite pleasing about the idea of Springfield as a place with no fixed history. A town where the plant opened twice, the monorail had no track, and the doors work differently depending on who's trying to open them. Which, given what the show has to say about American towns generally, might not even be a mistake. Something I noticed while putting all this together, and I'll drop it in here rather than sit on it. The mistakes are part of why I like the early seasons more. Not consciously. If you'd asked me why the classic era is better, I'd have given you the standard answer, which is the writing, and the writing is better, and that's not up for debate as far as I'm concerned. But there's something else going on. Those episodes look like they were made by people. Every wobble in the line is a hand. The upside-down room, the phone cord that vanishes, the donut that never gets smaller, all of it is evidence that somebody was there, sat at a desk under a deadline. I'm not saying I want the errors back. That would be a daft position. Nobody at that studio was trying to produce charming imperfections. They were trying to make the show correctly and occasionally didn't manage it. And it would be insulting to reframe their bad weeks as an aesthetic. What I'm saying is that the roughness carries information, and the information is this was difficult and somebody did it anyway. Which brings me round to why any of this is good to have on at 1 a.m. There's a certain kind of thing that works for this, and a certain kind that doesn't. And I don't think it's about the subject matter at all. It's about whether the thing is asking you for anything. A story asks you for something. It wants you to hold on to who people are and what they want and what's at stake, and it's structured to make you need to know what happens. That's fine when you're awake. It's the opposite of useful when you're not. This has none of that. There's no plot. Nothing builds. If you drifted off somewhere around the mailbox and woke up in the middle of the Skinner business, you haven't missed anything because there was nothing to miss. Every part of this is just a small observation with a bit of explanation attached, sat next to another small observation in no particular order. You could listen to these sections in any sequence and it would work exactly as well. That's deliberate. And I think the specific pleasure of it, the reason this kind of thing works at all, is that it's knowledge with no obligation attached. Nobody is ever going to need to know that Kearney's wristbands vanished. There's no test. You will not be a better or worse person for retaining any of it, which makes it restful in a way that useful information isn't. There's a version of me that finds it slightly absurd to have spent this long on it. Thousands of cataloged errors, dozens of people maintaining a database, and now a couple of hours of me talking about it, all about a cartoon where a snowsuit changed color. But I've never really believed things have to matter to be worth doing. Some of the best hours I've had have gone on things of no consequence at all, and I suspect that's true for most people. And anyway, the worst thing anyone can hold against this show is that a book on a shelf turned purple during a couch gag with elephants in it, which is not much of a charge sheet. Right, back to the errors. Because there's one character who has more of them attached to her than anybody else, and she doesn't get nearly enough credit for it. Homer's the one people talk about, because Homer's characterization has drifted enormously over the years, and that's a well-worn argument. But Homer's inconsistencies are mostly about personality. Marge's are about facts, actual, stated, on-screen facts about her life that don't line up. Start with Luan Van Houten. There's an episode in season 15, The Way We Weren't, which shows Marge meeting Luan when the two of them were 10 years old. Childhood friends, or at least childhood acquaintances. That's established on screen as part of the story. And back in season 3, in Homer Defined, Marge says she first met Luan in an emergency room. The occasion being that Bart and Milhouse had drunk paint. Both of those can't be true. Either she'd known this woman since primary school, or she met her over 2 poison children in a waiting room. The show has said both, 12 seasons apart, with total confidence each time. Then there's the painting. In The Trouble with Trillions, Marge mentions that she painted the boat picture that hangs in the television room. The one that's been on that wall in the background of hundreds of scenes, she made it for Homer. And then in Diatribe of a Mad Housewife, season 15, she's looking around the room for inspiration for her novel, and she looks at that same painting and reads the label on the frame and says out loud, "Scene from Moby Dick." She read the label of a painting she made herself to find out what it was of. I find that one funnier than almost anything else in this video because of how mundane it is. It's not a dramatic contradiction. It's a woman not recognizing her own artwork in her own living room. And then there's the flying. This is the big one, and it's the one that shows the problem most clearly, so let me set it out properly. Season 6 has fear of flying. Marge is revealed to have a serious phobia of airplanes, not nerves. A phobia with a childhood origin treated seriously by the episode, and pointedly not cured by the end of it. The last thing the episode does is confirm that she still has it. The problem is season 3, Mr. Lisa goes to Washington, where the entire family gets on an aeroplane and flies to Washington, D.C. for Lisa's speech, and Marge is absolutely fine. Now, you could argue that this one goes the acceptable way around. The D.C. episode came first, and the phobia was invented afterwards, so it's a retcon rather than a contradiction. New information about a character's past applied backwards. Except the family have flown a great many times since as well. Australia, Japan, various other places, and the phobia only exists when an episode is about the phobia, which is, when you get down to it, how nearly everything works on the show. I've got one more from this family, and it's a small one that I think about more than I should. Boy Meets Curl, season 21. Marge is curling, and she pops her shoulder out of place. Painful. Clear moment. And then in the next scene, she's got a cast on her wrist. Her wrist, which is not her shoulder and which is not what happened to her. That's a proper old-fashioned mistake, that one. No timeline arguments, no retcon debate. Somebody drew the wrong injury. Here's what I actually want to say about Marge, though, having spent a while looking at all this. She's the character the show has revised the most, and I think that's because she's the one who has to hold the family together for the episode's premise to work. Every time the writers need a reason for the story to happen, they need Marge to have some specific quality. So she gets one, a fear, a hobby, an old friend, a talent, a past. And they don't cross-reference. Why would they? It's a comedy. The episode has to be funny in 22 minutes, and nobody in 1997 imagined that in 2026 there'd be people watching every episode back-to-back looking for whether she'd met the same woman twice. The result is a character with several biographies stacked on top of each other, which is not a bad way to describe most people's mums, if I'm honest. Anyway. Speaking of things characters remember incorrectly, there's a whole cluster of these around firsts. This show cannot keep track of anybody's first anything. That's the pattern I want to talk about, and it's a good one because it's so specific. Not this happened twice, but a character stated that something was their first time doing a thing that we watched them do years earlier. Here's the cleanest example. The Way We Weren't, season 15. There's a bit where Milhouse kisses Homer, and afterwards Milhouse says that was the first kiss of his entire life. Except we watch Milhouse kiss Samantha Stanky in Bart's Friend Falls in Love. Back in season 3. That's the whole plot of the episode. Milhouse gets a girlfriend, Bart is jealous about it, and it ends badly when Samantha's father finds out and sends her to a convent school. It's one of the sadder ones, actually, and the kiss is the entire reason the story works. So the first kiss of Milhouse's life happened 12 seasons before the first kiss of Milhouse's life. Then there's Lisa and her crushes. Dude, where's my ranch? Season 14. Lisa meets a boy called Luke and says he's her first crush. And there's a queue of boys behind that statement, all of them on record. Nelson, who she went out with. Corey, who was on posters on her wall. Thelonious from the gifted school. There's a boy who works at the library and Bart's girlfriend. And there's Mr. Bergstrom. Now, somebody on the mistake database has pushed back on the Bergstrom one, and I think they're right, so I'll be fair here. What Lisa had for Mr. Bergstrom wasn't really a crush, it was closer to hero worship. A kind, intelligent adult paid attention to her for the first time, and she fell apart when he left. That's not the same thing, but the rest of them stand. Nelson in particular is not arguable. That was a relationship. Apu's got one too, and it's an odd one because it's about civic duty rather than romance. At the end of Much Apu About Nothing, season 7, Apu finds out he's been called for jury duty for the first time. It's treated as a milestone, part of the emotional payoff of the whole immigration story. He's a citizen now, and here comes the paperwork to prove it. Except Apu was on a jury in The Boy Who Knew Too Much, which is season 5, which slightly undercuts the moment if you think about it. The emotional climax of him becoming an American is that he gets to do a thing he had already done. And there's a lovely one attached to the Skinner business, which I'm bringing up because it's a good demonstration of how a single retcon keeps generating problems for years afterwards. Boy Meets Girl is again season 21. There's a flashback in which Agnes Skinner blames Seymour for costing her an Olympic gold medal in 1952 by kicking her from inside the womb, which is impossible under the version of events the show established in season 9, because the Seymour we know isn't her son and wasn't in that womb. If anyone kicked Agnes in 1952, it was the other Seymour, the real one, who came back from Vietnam and got run out of town, so the show is producing new flashbacks about a childhood it explicitly said didn't happen, on a character it explicitly said isn't that person more than a decade later. At this point, I think the honest reading is that the show simply put the Tamzarian episode down and walked away from it, and everything since has been made by people writing Skinner as Skinner because that's who he obviously is. Which brings me to what I actually think is going on with all of these. Comedy runs on firsts. A first kiss, a first crush, a first jury summons, a first anything is a natural story engine. It gives you a character who doesn't know what they're doing, stakes that don't need explaining, and an ending that writes itself. So when a writer needs one, they take one. And on a show with 800-odd episodes, everybody has run out of genuine firsts by about season 6. The alternative would be a writer's room with a full-time continuity archivist sat there saying, no, actually, Milhouse has kissed someone, you'll have to think of a different story. And I don't think that show would have been better. I think it would have been slower and more careful and considerably less funny. Right, let's do the category with the most unsettling name, which is revealing mistakes. There's a category in the databases called revealing mistakes, and I want to explain what it means because the name is doing something quite specific. A continuity mistake is when the show contradicts itself. A revealing mistake is when the show accidentally shows you how it's made. It's the boom mic in the shot. It's the wire holding the actor up. It's the moment where the illusion slips and you can see the machinery underneath. In live action, those are usually crew members or equipment. In animation, they're stranger because there's no set to accidentally film. What gets revealed instead is the process, the layering, the order things were drawn in, the fact that everything you're looking at is a stack of separate pieces pretending to be one image. There are around 140 of these cataloged on this show, and the good ones are my favorites in the whole hobby. The upside-down background from the Christmas episode is the flagship. That's not a continuity error because nothing contradicts anything. It's a revealing mistake because what it reveals is that the room behind Homer and Marge is a separate painted object that can be put in the wrong way round, which is not something you're supposed to be thinking about while two cartoon characters hug. Here's another from the same episode, and it's a much quieter one. Marge is on the phone to her sisters, twirling the phone cord around her finger while they say something unkind about Homer. Then she puts the cord down, and the cord disappears, not the phone, just the cord for a moment right at the end of the scene, immediately before it cuts away to somewhere else, which tells you exactly what happened. The cord was on its own layer, animated separately because it needed to move independently while she twirled it, and at the end of the sequence, that layer ran out a fraction before the cut. You can see the join. That's the whole point of the category. There's a second phone one in the same episode, funnily enough. After Bart's prank call to Moe, there's a shot of Bart and Lisa laughing, and the telephone cord isn't connected to the receiver, just floating near it, not attached to anything. 2 phone cord errors in one episode, which makes me think somebody on that production had a particularly bad week with phones. Then there's the donut, which is the one I'd put on a poster. Mr. Burns comes over the plant's public address system. Homer has started eating a donut, and he takes a bite, then he takes 2 more bites over the course of the scene. And the donut stays exactly the same size throughout. That's a beautiful little failure because it reveals something about how animation actually works. Eating is genuinely difficult to draw. Every bite means a new version of the object, drawn to match the bite, held in a hand that's also moving, in a mouth that's also talking. So somebody drew 1 donut and reused it, and Homer chews through 3 mouthfuls of a pastry that never gets smaller. Here's a similar one from a different angle. In Mr. Plow, after Homer's cleared the road so the school bus can get through, Bart arrives at school, and the pavement outside is covered in snow apart from Martin's footprints. Then Bart gets out and the pavement's been shoveled, completely clear. And then Bart gets pelted with snowballs, falls face first onto the pavement, and the pavement is covered in snow again. 3 states in one continuous sequence, in a shot that runs maybe 15 seconds. And each state is there because that particular beat needed it. You need the snow for the footprints gag, you need it clear so it reads as a school entrance, and you need it back for the faceplant to be funny rather than horrifying. That's the show choosing the joke over the surface 3 times running without anyone in the room minding. And then there's the door. Marge comes home and finds bullet holes in the front door. Then the shot changes to a point of view from behind the door, so you're looking at the same holes from the other side. And the holes have moved. 3 of them on the right were evenly spaced, and now the middle one has slid down toward the bottom one. And the big hole in the middle of the door has changed shape. from something irregular to something rounder. I love this one because of the effort involved. Somebody drew a pattern of bullet holes. Then somebody else, working on a different shot, had to draw the same pattern from the other side and had to work out what that would look like reversed, and got it nearly right. Nearly right is doing a lot of work in this hobby. Almost everything in this video is somebody getting something nearly right, which is a decent segue because the next lot are the ones where the show got something wrong about the actual world rather than about itself. Lobsters aren't red, not living ones. A lobster in a tank, walking about, minding its business, is a sort of dark, mottled brown, sometimes with a bit of blue or green in it, depending on where it's from. The red thing happens when you boil it. Heat breaks down the proteins that are masking the red pigment underneath, and out it comes, which means the lobsters in the tank at Luigi's, which are bright red, are already cooked and are also somehow still alive and moving around. That's one of about 50 entries in the factual errors category, and it's my favorite because it's the kind of thing that's wrong absolutely everywhere. Restaurant signs, cartoons, children's books. Half the world thinks lobsters are red because that's the only way most people ever see them. The show is not uniquely guilty, it's just also guilty. Here's a physics one, and it's a good one because it's about a gag that couldn't happen. Homer makes an enormous ball of sugar. He starts with a normal-sized candy floss on a paper cone, then coats it in liquid caramel, then adds more candy floss, then more caramel, building it up into something the size of a boulder. The problem is that candy floss is essentially spun air. It has almost no structural strength at all. Pour hot liquid caramel onto it, and it collapses and dissolves. It doesn't hold its shape and become a foundation for the next layer. What Homer's built there is a load-bearing cloud. I'm aware of how humorless it is to say that about a joke. I'm saying it anyway, because somebody wrote it up as a factual error, and I respect the commitment. Now, there's one in this category that's a bit more interesting, and it's from The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, which is the Season 9 opener. The World Trade Center features heavily. And there are a couple of details that are off. The windows are shown as being able to open, which they couldn't, and the two towers are shown facing each other square on, directly in front of one another, when in reality, they sat at an angle to each other. Now, I'm not going to dwell on that episode because its history got complicated for reasons that have nothing to do with animation. But as a factual error, it's a straightforward one. Somebody drew a famous building from memory rather than from reference, which is a thing that happens constantly and which almost nobody ever notices unless they've stood in the place. Here's a much smaller one that I find quite sweet. Rod and Todd Flanders are in the car, roasting marshmallows over a lighter. Both marshmallows have gone black, but only one of them, Todd's, was actually held over the flame. That's a level of scrutiny I want to acknowledge properly. Somebody watched two cartoon children burn two marshmallows and worked out that only one of them had been anywhere near the heat source. And here's another where the crime is speed rather than accuracy. Ned Flanders is filling in a hole. In one shot, he's only just started. Then it cuts to Bart, who talks to himself for a few seconds. Then it cuts back, and Ned has finished burying the entire thing, which is not physically possible in the time available, and which is a very common category of error in animation generally. Off-screen tasks complete at whatever speed the edit requires. Nobody's going to spend 40 seconds of screen time watching Ned Flanders shovel earth. So Ned Flanders shovels earth at 4 times the speed of any man alive, and the episode moves on. One more, and this one's genuinely clever as a spot. Homer's on the bathroom scales, and his stomach is caught on the towel rail. And somebody has pointed out that if his stomach were positioned the way the shot shows it, he physically couldn't see the scales at all. He'd have to lean round himself to read the number, and he isn't. That's a spatial problem rather than a factual one, strictly, but it lands in the same place. It's the difference between drawing what a thing looks like and drawing what a thing would actually be like. And that, I think, is the honest summary of this whole category. These aren't research failures. nobody sat in the room and confidently asserted that lobsters are red. What happened is that a group of people drew things the way things look in their heads at speed in a comedy, and the way things look in your head is not always the way they are, which is true of all of us and is a fairly forgivable thing to be caught out on. Props and clothing next. There's a whole subgenre of these, and it's the daftest one in the video. Kearney's wristbands are the ones that got me. Here's the scene. Kearney is sat there eating jelly bean cookies and reading a letter that Marge sent. There's a quick shot of his hand coming up to his mouth with the cookie in it, and there is nothing on his wrist. Bare wrist, no jewelry, nothing. Then the shot changes, revealing that it's Kearney doing the reading rather than one of the kids, and he's wearing spiked black collars on his wrists, which is a specific thing to forget, because those wristbands are a fairly central part of his whole look. He's a bully. The spikes are the point. It's like drawing Krusty without the hair. I've become quite fond of this subgenre, which is small objects and items of clothing behaving inconsistently, because it's where the sheer volume of the work shows most clearly. Every character in every shot is carrying a certain amount of stuff. Clothes, accessories, whatever they happen to be holding, and each of those things has to be there, in the right place, in the right color, in every single drawing. Multiply that by however many drawings there are in 22 minutes, and you can see how something ends up on the wrong wrist. Here's one from the classroom, and it's a proper vanishing act. Bart takes off his jumper to reveal a Mad Magazine shirt underneath, which is the whole point of the scene, and he puts the jumper down on his desk. Next shot, the jumper's gone. Not moved, not fallen, just not there anymore. He put an object down on a surface and the object stopped existing. And there's a companion piece to that from the same room involving the blackboard. Bart comes back into the classroom after the wolf attack. Mrs. Krabappel is writing on the board, and there's a decent amount of writing up there. Several lines of it. Cut to Bart, cut back to Krabappel. Blackboard's clean. She has wiped an entire lesson off the board in the time it took a boy to walk into a room, which is either the fastest anyone has ever moved on this show, or somebody drew the second shot from a clean model and never checked. Then there's the sling. A Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace. The children are all sitting round discussing their dreams. Ralph has his arm in a sling, and the sling is blue. Then there's a shot of Principal Skinner. Then it comes back, and the sling is white. That's a color error, so it belongs with everything I said earlier about how color errors happen, and I'm not going to go over that ground again. What I'll say is that it's a good demonstration of why they cluster on props specifically. A character's own palette is fixed and heavily reused. A one-off object that only appears in one episode has been specified once, on one sheet, and there's no muscle memory backing it up. Here's a lovely mechanical one from a competition scene. Nelson punches a hole in the honor roller during the finals. It's a moment of proper vandalism, a hole in a thing that shouldn't have a hole in it. And across the shots that follow, the hole disappears and reappears. There, not there, there again. Damage is one of the hardest things to keep consistent in animation because it means every subsequent drawing of that object is now a modified drawing. You can't reach for the standard version anymore. And under a deadline, people reach for the standard version, which incidentally is also the reason Homer's car in that helicopter scene was fine a few minutes later, and I mentioned that earlier, so I'll leave it there. There's one more I want to include because it's the most trivial thing in this entire video, and I think it deserves recognition for that. There's an error catalog that consists entirely of a character's hand going somewhere it shouldn't relative to another character's arm. That's it. That's the whole entry. Two limbs occupying a slightly wrong relationship for a fraction of a second, spotted, written down, and filed alongside a resurrected therapist and a school that changes color. The database does not rank these things. A missing wristband and a plot hole that broke a fandom for 30 years sit next to each other with the same little share button underneath. I find that quite egalitarian, actually. Every mistake is worth the same, which is a nice principle for a hobby. Now, the people who write these entries are only half of the story. The other half are the people who write in to argue with them. There's a section of the database called corrections, not mistakes. Corrections, it's where entries go when somebody has successfully argued that they aren't mistakes at all, and there's a whole voting mechanism attached to it. Somebody submits a mistake, somebody else replies underneath explaining why it isn't one. Other people vote on whether the reply is convincing, and if enough of them agree, the entry gets moved out of the mistakes list and into the corrections list, where it sits as a permanent record of a thing that was wrongly accused. I want to spend a bit of time on this because I think it's the most interesting part of the whole culture, and it's the bit nobody talks about. You've already heard one of these. The skateboard right at the start, where somebody argued that Bart had time between shots to get hold of a different board. That's a suggested correction. It's sitting there under the entry, permanently waiting for votes. Here's another one I came across. There's an entry about Lisa saying Luke was her first crush, which I went through earlier. And underneath it, somebody has written in to say that the Mr. Bergstrom example doesn't count, because what Lisa felt for him was admiration for someone who was kind to her rather than a crush, and then adds that the person is correct about all the others, which is such a specific and good-natured bit of pedantry. They're not defending the show, they're not attacking the person who submitted it. They're just tidying up the argument, conceding most of it, and improving the accuracy of a complaint about a cartoon. And here's one that I think is genuinely the best thing I read while putting this together. The Marvin Monroe entry, the one about him being sick rather than dead. Somebody has written a correction to it, and the argument goes like this. It was never actually explained how Monroe died. Nobody on screen ever confirmed the specifics. The grave existed, and the hospital existed, and the clip show mentioned it. But all of those things could simply reflect what the people of Springfield believed. Marge says she thought he was dead. Thought. So possibly the entire town assumed he died and built things in his memory and put up a headstone, and he was in fact just very unwell somewhere else the whole time. That is a defense. It is a real defense, offered in good faith, and it very nearly works. I love it because of what it implies about Springfield. A town where a man can go quiet for a few years and everyone concludes he's dead and starts naming buildings after him without checking. Which, having watched a lot of episodes, is completely in character for that town. There are other sections too, and they tell you something about how carefully this stuff has been thought through. There's one called Stupidity, which is separate from mistakes. That's for characters doing things that make no sense, but which aren't errors, because the character is simply being an idiot. Homer being an idiot is not a mistake, it's the premise. There's one for questions, where people ask about things they didn't understand and other people answer. I read a good one about Who Shot Mr. Burns, where somebody couldn't work out why groundskeeper Willie reacts with such shock when Chief Wiggum describes Space Invaders as a video game. And the answer, once it's explained, is lovely. Willie was so far gone that he genuinely believed he'd been defending the Earth from aliens. And finding out it was a game is news to him. There's a section for Easter eggs, there's one for trivia, there's one for quotes. So the whole apparatus around this show is not just a fault list. It's a reference work assembled voluntarily with an appeals process. And I keep thinking about the appeals process specifically. Somebody built that. Somebody looked at a website full of people complaining about films and thought, what this needs is a mechanism for defending the accused. That's the bit that makes me think the whole hobby is fundamentally kind. The default assumption is not that the show was lazy. The default assumption is that there might be an explanation and that somebody should be allowed to make the case, which honestly is a better standard of discourse than most places on the internet manage about things that actually matter. The film is a different animal though, separate production, separate problems, and far fewer of them. 11 writers, that's how many people have a writing credit on the Simpsons movie. James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, Al Jean, Mike Scully, George Meyer, David Merkin, Mike Rice, Matt Selman, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, and Ian Maxtone Graham. 11. on one 90-minute film. And what's interesting about that list is that it's not a case of a project being passed around and rewritten by strangers. That's more or less a roll call of the people who defined the show across its best years. Swartzwelder wrote more episodes than anyone. Merkin and Scully and Gene ran the thing at different points. Meyer is the man half the room credits with the show's actual sense of humor. So the film is what happens when you get the entire institutional memory of the show into one room and ask it to make something for a cinema. It came out on the 27th of July, 2007, directed by David Silverman, which brings that name up for the last time tonight and does it nicely given where we started. The man who rescued the first episode ever made ended up directing the film. Animation was handled by Film Roman and Rough Draft Studios, with AKOM contributing as well. Hans Zimmer did the score, which is a slightly surreal sentence to say out loud. Budget was somewhere around $75 million. It took roughly $527 million worldwide, about 183 of that domestically, which made it the 8th biggest film of that year, and at the time of release, the second highest grossing traditionally animated film ever made, behind The Lion King. It got 87% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 80 on Metacritic, which for a film adaptation of an 18-year-old television show is a very good result. Now, here's the reason I wanted a section on it, and it's about the errors rather than the numbers. The film has far fewer of them, substantially fewer, and I don't think that's a mystery. Think about what we've covered tonight. Half a year per episode, 20-odd episodes a year, a pipeline that runs continuously and can never stop, work split across an ocean with limited back and forth. That's not a system designed for perfection, it's a system designed to deliver, weekly, forever. A film is the opposite. It's one object. It had years, not months. It had a budget that isn't being divided across a season. Everybody involved knew it would be projected onto something 40 feet wide, in front of an audience who had paid, and would be looked at more closely than any episode ever had been. So they checked, repeatedly, and it shows, which tells you that the errors in the series were never really about skill. They were about throughput. Give the same people the same characters and enough time, and the mistakes largely go away. There's a nice bit of context in the fact sheet about this that I keep coming back to. The show's animation has been through 3 domestic studios over its life. Klasky Schupo did the Tracy Ullman shorts in the first 3 seasons. Film Roman took over from season 4 through to season 27. And since season 28, it's been done in-house at Fox and then 20th Television Animation, which means the show has changed animation houses twice, gone digital once, changed aspect ratio once, changed composers, changed showrunners repeatedly, and survived several strikes and 2 serious threats of cancellation. The 2011 one was real, incidentally. Fox threatened to end it unless costs came down by 45%. And through all of that, the mistake rate stayed roughly the same. I find that genuinely interesting. You'd expect the errors to spike during the chaotic periods and drop during the settled ones, and by and large, they don't. What actually reduced the errors was going digital, which removed whole physical categories of failure and making a film, which removed the deadline. There's a sequel coming, by the way. It's currently penciled in for September 2027, having moved from an earlier date. Almost nothing is confirmed about it beyond the fact that it exists. I have no idea whether it'll be any good. I'll watch it, obviously. And then presumably somebody will spend a fortnight going through it frame by frame, and in about 2 years, there'll be a page for it with a couple of dozen entries and a correction section, and the whole apparatus will start up again, which is a pleasant thought to have, really. Something else has been happening quietly across all those years, and it's to do with the characters themselves. Put a frame from 1989 next to a frame from last year, and they barely look like the same show. Not in the obvious way. Everyone knows the early episodes look rough. What I mean is the actual designs. The characters have been redrawn gradually, continuously, by hundreds of different hands over 37 years, and none of it happened at once. and there was never an announcement. Homer's the clearest. In the very early episodes, his eyes sit further apart and lower on his head, his jaws heavier, and his whole body is baggier and less defined. The overbite is more pronounced. He looks like a rougher sketch of himself because he was one. Bart's head was proportionally bigger, his hair had fewer spikes and they sat differently. Marge's hair had a different silhouette entirely, and it moved with more weight because it was drawn by people who were thinking about it as a physical object rather than as a shape. Now, technically, none of this is a mistake. Design evolution isn't an error, but it produces errors constantly for a very specific reason: flashbacks. Because every time the show goes back to the past, it has to decide which version of these characters to draw. And it draws the current one. Always. Bart in a season 30 flashback is drawn like a season 30 Bart, not like a 1989 Bart, even if the scene is meant to be set in 1989, which means the show's own visual history has been overwritten. The past looks like the present. In the same way, the past keeps sliding forward in time to stay a fixed distance behind it. And there's a related thing that happened with the move to high definition that I don't think gets talked about enough. When the show went widescreen in season 20, the characters got cleaned up as part of it. Sharper lines, more consistent proportions, a new opening sequence built for the new frame. And the practical effect of that is that the modern characters are more standardized than the classic ones ever were, which is why modern episodes have fewer of the sorts of errors we've been going through. Not because anyone's trying harder, because a digital model is harder to draw wrong than a hand-drawn one. Krusty's an interesting one to track because his design carries a joke inside it. He's meant to look like an aging television clown, so there's a certain amount of built-in wear. And across the run, his features have shifted around quite a lot, particularly his eyes and the shape of his hair, in ways that are hard to separate from the general drift of everyone else. The background characters have moved even more, and there's a reason for that. The name cast get model sheets that everybody uses. The background crowd get drawn from a much looser reference, and they turn up in dozens of episodes a year, handled by different people. So the man in the background of a courtroom in season 4 and the man in the background of a courtroom in season 24 may nominally be the same person and look meaningfully different, which, when you combine it with everything I said earlier about crowd scenes, explains why so many of the errors in this video happen at the edges of the frame rather than in the middle of it. The middle is protected, the edges are improvised. Here's the thing I actually find quite moving about all this, and then I'll move on. There is no single canonical Homer Simpson. There's a rough average of decades worth of drawings made by an enormous number of people across 4 decades, most of whom never met each other, many of whom worked on opposite sides of the world. The character exists as a consensus. He's whatever the collective hand of everyone who's ever drawn him has settled on. And it drifts slowly, the way a language drifts, with nobody in charge of it. Which means that when we talk about the show looking different now, we're not really talking about a decision anyone made. We're talking about the accumulated effect of a very large number of people, each drawing something slightly differently from the person before them. That's not a mistake, but it's the same underlying force that produces the mistakes, which is a lot of hands on one object over a very long time. And speaking of a lot of people passing through, there's one more group I want to talk about before we wrap up, and that's the guests. 3 Beatles have been on this show: Paul, George, and Ringo. All 3 separately as themselves, and the trivia note attached to that is a good one. It's the only non-variety program ever to manage it. Not a chat show, not a music special, a sitcom about a yellow family. The show holds the world record for most guest stars featured in a television series, which as of a few years back stood at over 800 people, which is roughly 1 per episode, sustained for 37 years. I bring this up because guest stars produce a particular kind of error, and it's one we've already brushed against. The manatee thing from earlier is the clean example. You bring in a well-known actor to play an expert, and the expert says something wrong about the subject they're an expert in. That's a script problem rather than a performance problem, obviously. Nobody expects a guest to fact-check their own lines, but it lands differently when it comes out of a famous mouth. because the whole point of casting somebody recognizable in that role is to borrow their authority for the joke. There's a broader version of this that's worth mentioning, which is that guest appearances tend to warp the continuity around them. Because a guest episode has to be built around whoever's available. The story is reverse engineered from the casting, which means characters develop new interests, new backstories, new relatives, and new professional connections purely so that a famous person has a reason to be in the room. And those new facts then sit in the canon forever, contradicting whatever was there before. A fair chunk of what we've covered tonight has that shape underneath it. Somebody needed a story, and a story needs a premise, and the premise needed Marge to be afraid of something or Lisa to have never fancied anyone before. Now, there's one situation involving the cast that I want to handle carefully because it isn't a mistake and I don't want it filed as one. Phil Hartman was one of the great recurring voices on this show. Troy McClure, Lionel Hutz. Both of them enormous, both of them the kind of character that gets quoted for decades. And after his death in 1998, the production retired both characters rather than recasting them. That's not an error, that's a choice, and I think it's the right one. But it does create a permanent hole in the world of the show. Two people who lived in Springfield, who had jobs and running gags and relationships with the main cast, simply stopped existing, and it was never explained in the story and never should have been. There's a similar thing with Marcia Wallace and Edna Krabappel, who was a genuinely important character in a lot of the best episodes. And there's a piece of trivia I came across that I keep thinking about in relation to this. Of the whole regular voice cast, only 2 people ever regularly played a single character. Yeardley Smith as Lisa and Marcia Wallace as Edna. Everybody else was juggling a town, which puts the voice errors we talked about earlier in a slightly different light. When 6 people are covering hundreds of parts, the 2 who only had 1 each were the only ones who could never be mixed up with anybody. There's one more guest note that's less somber, and it's about Kelsey Grammer. Sideshow Bob has been in the show since season 1, and he's voiced by Kelsey Grammer, and he's been in enough episodes that he's arguably not a guest star at all anymore, which is a category problem the show has run into repeatedly. A guest turns up once, works brilliantly, comes back, and at some point becomes a resident. And when that happens, the character's history has to be invented retrospectively in pieces by whoever's writing that particular episode. Bob's got a brother, Bob's got parents, Bob's got a wife and a child at one point. None of that existed when he was a man in a jumpsuit standing next to Krusty. So the deepest characters on this show are often the ones with the most contradictory pasts, precisely because they were built out of order. Which is, I suppose, the last mechanism I wanted to point at before we finish. Nearly everything in this video comes down to one of about 5 causes, and we've now been through all of them. Volume of drawings, split production, deadline pressure, a cast covering too many parts, and a world that got built backwards, 1 episode at a time, by people who had no idea it would still be going in 2026. None of which is a criticism, all of which is just what happens when something runs long enough. The Simpsons started as filler, not a pilot, not a series in development. Filler, short animated bits, a minute or 2 long, dropped into the Tracy Ullman Show to cover the gaps while the sketch performers changed costumes. The family turned up for the first time on the 19th of April, 1987, and 48 of those shorts were made across the next 2 years before anyone decided this could be a program in its own right. I think about that a lot when I'm looking at early season errors because it explains the physical character of them. Those shorts were made by Klasky Supo, animated in the loose, wobbly, elastic style they were known for. Everything moves too much, nothing holds its shape. Characters distort as they walk, faces stretch, limbs go rubbery. That's not a flaw in the shorts, that's the aesthetic. And for a 60-second bit tucked between sketches, it's exactly right. The problem is that when it became a weekly half hour, that style came with it. Klasky Chupo stayed on for the shorts, and then for the first 3 seasons proper. So the show spent its early years animated in a style that had been designed for something else entirely, by a studio that was very good at that style and hadn't been asked to change it. while the producers in Los Angeles increasingly wanted something tighter and more controlled. That's the friction underneath the first episode disaster we went through earlier. It wasn't incompetence on anybody's part, it was two different ideas of what the show should look like, being pursued simultaneously, on opposite sides of the Pacific, on a deadline. Film Roman took over from season 4 and refined the look. That's the version most people picture when they think of classic Simpsons. And they held it right through to season 27, which is a very long run for an animation house, before it came in-house at Fox. Here's what interests me about the shorts specifically, though. Almost nobody has watched them recently. They're difficult to find, they're not on the streaming service alongside everything else, and they're strange to look at. Homer sounds different. Bart looks like a different child. The whole family is meaner and less warm than they became. And because so few people have gone through them properly, they're one of the last bits of the show that hasn't been fully cataloged. The main series has a page for every season, 37 of them, going right up to the current one. The shorts don't get that treatment, which means there's a small, unexplored corner of this thing sitting out there. A couple of hours of the earliest version of these characters made in a hurry, in a style nobody was quite happy with, largely unexamined. If somebody wanted a project, that's where I'd point them. There's one more thing about the origin that's worth mentioning because it's a piece of the puzzle for a lot of what we've talked about. The show was never designed to have continuity. It couldn't have been. It began as unconnected, minute-long bits with no through line at all, and then became a sitcom in which the status quo resets by the end of every episode. That's the format it inherited and never really left. The A-plot happens, the B-plot happens, and by the closing credits, the house is standing, the marriage is intact, the job exists, and nobody has aged. That's the deal. Everything else, the whole enormous apparatus of Springfield history that people argue about online, got assembled accidentally on top of a format that was built to forget. So when the show contradicts itself about when the plant opened or who met whom in an emergency room, it isn't failing at something it set out to do. It's succeeding at something it did set out to do, which is to deliver a self-contained 22 minutes, and then being held to a standard nobody applied to it for the first decade of its life. I don't think that excuses everything. The wrist cast on the wrong limb is still a wrist cast on the wrong limb. But it does reframe about half of this video, and I wanted to say so before we get much further along. Right, time. Clocks, specifically, and how badly this show handles them. Time is the thing this show handles worst, and it's not close. Not the big timeline stuff, which I've already been through and which is a structural consequence of nobody aging. I mean small time, minutes and seconds. The amount of time it takes for a thing to happen inside a single scene. Because animation has a peculiar relationship with duration. Everything you see took a specific amount of screen time to happen, but the amount of work required to draw it has nothing to do with how long it should take in the world. So the temptation always is to let things happen at the speed the edit wants rather than the speed reality would allow. Ned filling in that hole is the clearest one. He starts, we cut away for a few seconds of Bart talking to himself, we cut back, and the work is finished. Nobody digs like that. Mrs. Crabapple wiping the blackboard clean in the time it takes a boy to enter a room is the same failure in a classroom. And there's a lovely, more elaborate version in Homer versus Dignity, where the whole timing of a parade sequence falls apart at once. Lisa reads writing on the side of a float long before the float has arrived anywhere near her. And Mr. Burns takes an implausibly long stretch to change into a costume, and the parade obligingly moves at whatever pace each beat requires. It's not one error. It's a scene where time is a suggestion. Then there's the clock-in, the cartridge family which I mentioned earlier and which is the purest example of the type. Dialogue says one time, A visible object in the frame, says another, and the object loses because nobody was cross-referencing the props against the script. Here's one I haven't mentioned yet, and I like it because the problem is entirely logical rather than visual. Magical History Tour. Season 15, there's a Mozart segment. Lisa puts a sleeping tonic into the Emperor's wine, which is a plan and a reasonable one. And then she falls asleep too, which shouldn't happen because she only put it in the one glass, his glass. She drank from her own. Unless she's poisoned herself deliberately, which the scene doesn't suggest, the tonic has spread across the table on its own initiative. That's not a timing problem exactly, but it's the same underlying thing. The scene needs an outcome, and the mechanism to reach that outcome is supplied afterwards, or not at all. There's another in this family from Tree House of Horror X, and it's the longest single complaint I found anywhere in the databases. Somebody has written several hundred words about a Mars rocket. The short version, Lisa discovers she has a seat on a spacecraft as the proofreader, and the objection is that there's no plausible way she wouldn't have already known. The family only learn about the rocket by finding an invitation. It's New Year's Day, so there's no post. Every other passenger is a celebrity who has apparently been reached successfully. And Lisa was walking about town and going to church, so she wasn't difficult to find. It's a Tree House of Horror segment. It has no continuity obligations whatsoever. And somebody has laid out the logistics of the invitation process in genuine detail. I want to be clear that I mean this as a compliment. That level of engagement with a Halloween sketch is not something to be embarrassed about. It's the same instinct that makes people memorize train timetables or learn every cathedral in England. The subject doesn't matter, the attention does. There's a smaller one from Marge on the Lam, Season 5, that has the same shape and is much quicker. Chief Wiggum is describing a suspect over the radio during a car chase. He says she's wearing a green dress, pearls, and a lot of blue hair. But from where his police car is, all he can see is the hair. The dress and the pearls aren't visible from that angle. He's describing details he has no access to, which is either an error or the single most competent thing Chief Wiggum has ever done. And here's the thing that makes all the timing errors slightly different from everything else in this video. Color errors and vanishing noses are production failures. Somebody's hand slipped. But timing errors are almost always decisions. Somebody chose to have Ned finish the hole, because watching him not finish it would have been boring. Somebody chose to let the parade compress because the joke was at the other end of it. Those aren't mistakes in the way a missing wristband is a mistake. They're the ordinary compromises of storytelling made visible because the medium can't hide them the way live action can. And that gray area between an error and a choice is where a surprising amount of this hobby actually lives. I've been describing the pipeline all night as though it ran smoothly. It didn't. It kept nearly falling over, and it's worth going through the list, because the errors we've been looking at were produced under all of this rather than in spite of it. Start with the money. In 1998, the voice cast threatened to strike over pay. That got resolved with increases. In 2004, they stopped doing script reads entirely, which is a more serious position to take than it sounds, because a script read is where an episode gets fixed. Salaries went up to around $360,000 an episode after that. In 2015, Harry Shearer left briefly over a contract before a new deal was reached, and he came back. So the people making the voices have downed tools or threatened to 3 separate times, then the writers. The 2007 and 2008 strike hit season 19, which came down to 20 episodes. The 2023 strike hit season 35, which came down to 18. Both times, the show absorbed it better than live-action programs did purely because of the lead time. Given how long each episode takes, a stoppage doesn't show up on screen for the best part of a year. And by then, it's over. Then the cancellation threat, which was real and which I mentioned briefly earlier. In 2011, Fox told the production that costs had to come down by 45%, or the show would end. 45. That's not a negotiating position, that's a demolition notice. It got sorted, obviously, or we wouldn't be here. Then the composer. Alf Clausen scored the show from season 2 onwards. Nearly 600 episodes across 27 years, conducting a 35-piece orchestra for the underscore. 2 Emmys for original music, 21 nominations, 5 Annie Awards. That's not a jobbing television composer, that's one of the defining musical voices in American animation. He was let go in 2017 as a cost-cutting measure, sued over it, and the case was settled or dismissed. He was credited as composer emeritus for a while afterwards. The scoring went to Bleeding Fingers Music, which is a company co-founded by Hans Zimmer. Alf Clausen died on the 29th of May, 2025, at 84. I'll say plainly that I think the Clausen situation is the saddest thing in the entire history of this production, and it's got nothing to do with animation errors. The music was doing an enormous amount of work in those episodes, and most people never consciously noticed it, which is exactly what a score is supposed to do. And then, on top of all of that, 2020. Production went fully remote in March of that year during season 32. And it worked. No episodes were missed. The cast recorded from home, the table reads moved online, and the pipeline kept turning. Which, when you consider that this is a show requiring dozens of people in Los Angeles and over 100 in Seoul to coordinate over a 6-month cycle, is a remarkable thing to have pulled off with a couple of weeks' notice. Here's why I wanted this section in the video. Every mistake we've talked about tonight happened inside that. Not in a calm workshop with unlimited time. Inside a production that has been renegotiated, restructured, struck, threatened with cancellation, moved between 3 animation houses, converted from film to digital, converted from square to widescreen, and at one point sent home entirely. And the show kept coming out, weekly. For decade after decade, you can think 2 things at once here, and I do. The first is that a fair few of these errors were avoidable and somebody should have caught them. The second is that the fact that anything came out at all, on time to that standard for that long, is properly impressive. I don't think those cancel each other out. A missing arm is still a missing arm. But context is context. There's a stat in all this that I keep turning over. Guinness has a showdown for the longest-running American primetime animated series, the longest-running American sitcom by episode count, and the longest-running scripted primetime series in American television history on both seasons and episodes, plus the guest star record, plus more Emmys than any other animated program. None of those records were the goal. Nobody in that bungalow in 1989 watching an episode with an upside-down living room in it was thinking about records. They were thinking about whether the thing would survive to a second episode. Everything after that was accumulation. And accumulation is also, incidentally, exactly how you end up with a database that size. Same process, same cause. You just keep going and things pile up and eventually somebody counts them. The show has had a lot of different personalities, and I think the errors track them more closely than people realize. Let me sketch the shape of it because it makes a decent map. The first 3 seasons are the show working out what it is. Season 1 is grounded and a bit sad, honestly. It's about a man who can't provide for his family and a boy who's failing at school, and the jokes come out of that rather than sitting on top of it. Season 2 is where it finds its heart, brings in the supporting cast properly, does the first Treehouse of Horror, gives Mr. Burns a moment of vulnerability, gives Lessa an interior life. Season 3 sharpens the comedy and speeds everything up. Those are the seasons with the most animation errors by a distance, and we've been through why. Different studio, different style, a production still learning how to make itself. Then seasons 4 through 8, which is the run most people mean when they say classic. 4 is where a lot of people put the peak. The monorail, Mr. Plow, Lisa's first word. Enormously high joke density sitting on top of stories that still land emotionally, which is a very difficult combination to pull off, and which almost nothing else has ever managed. 5 gets more surreal under David Merkin. Homer goes to space. Cape Fear happens. 6 goes further and gets more ambitious with the Burns shooting cliffhanger and Lisa's wedding, and Maggie makes 3. 7 pulls back towards character and gives the secondary cast room, with Lisa going vegetarian and the 22 short films episode. 8 does the high concept experiments, including Homer's Enemy, which is the show taking itself apart on purpose, and the Poochie episode we talked about earlier. The errors in that stretch are the classic ones: the color changes, the missing limbs, the duplicated background characters, physical, production side, cell era mistakes. Then it shifts. Season 9 is where the continuity management changes, and the Skinner episode is the marker for that, which we've already covered at length. Season 10 is where Homer gets noticeably more reckless, which people call the jerk-ass turn, and where the plots get wilder and lean harder on celebrity. Phil Hartman died in 1998, and 2 significant characters went with him. Season 11 kills off Maud Flanders, which is the show making a permanent change on purpose. Season 12 gives Homer a crayon lodged in his brain as an explanation for his intelligence, and does the Behind the Laughter mockumentary, which is the show doing a fake documentary about its own decline while in the middle of one. And what you'll notice, if you look at the errors from that stretch onwards, is that they change type. Fewer paint problems, more contradictions, more characters remembering the wrong things about themselves. That's not a coincidence. The production got more technically competent at exactly the same time as the accumulated history got too large to hold in anyone's head. One curve went up while the other went down, and they crossed somewhere around season 12, which means the kind of mistake you find in a given episode tells you roughly when it was made without checking. If a character's jumper changes color, you're in the 90s. If a character claims something is their first time doing something they did in the 90s, you're in the 2000s. I find that genuinely useful as a way of thinking about the show. It's a rough dating method like tree rings. There's a related thing here about showrunners that I want to mention because it's the mechanism underneath all of this. This show has changed hands repeatedly. Different people have run it in different periods, and each of them brought a different set of instincts about what the show was for. Merkin pushed it surreal. Oakley and Weinstein pushed it towards character and the wider town. Scully pushed it towards spectacle and guests. Al Jean has run it for longer than anyone. None of those were wrong, they were different, and the show is a composite of all of them, which is why arguments about the golden age tend to be arguments about which of those instincts you liked best. And every handover is a point where the institutional memory thins out slightly. Whatever the previous lot knew about what had already been established, some of it doesn't transfer. That's not negligence, it's just what happens when an organization changes leadership 6 or 7 times over 30-odd years. So here's the version of all this that I'd actually stand behind. The mistakes in this show are not evidence of decline, they're evidence of duration. Every category we've covered tonight has a cause, and every one of those causes is a consequence of the thing continuing to exist. The color errors come from making it by hand at volume. The voice errors come from 6 people covering a town. The vanishing limbs come from deadline pressure on a physical medium. The plot holes come from a world assembled backwards over 4 decades by people who couldn't consult each other. The contradictions come from a format designed to reset every week and then asked to remember everything. There isn't a version of this show that ran for 30-odd years without producing all of that. It doesn't exist. You could have a shorter show with fewer mistakes, or you could have this one. And I know which I'd rather have, and so I suspect, does anyone still awake? One more thought before we head towards the end, and then I'll stop analyzing and go back to enjoying it. Nobody knows how old Mr. Burns is, including the show. I'm not going to go back over the reason nobody ages because I've already been through that and there's nothing new to add. What I want to do here is look at the characters where the age problem is worse than it is for everyone else, because there are a few and they're interesting for different reasons. Burns is the obvious one. The show has placed him at various points across an enormous range, and the gag has always been that he's ancient beyond reason. He's got memories that go back further than any human being could manage. He's referenced periods of history he could not plausibly have been alive for. And the show has never once tried to reconcile any of it, because reconciling it would kill the joke. That's not really a mistake then. It's a character whose entire comic function is to be impossibly old, and pinning him to a birth year would ruin him. But it does create knock-on problems, because the show keeps giving him a childhood, and those childhoods don't agree with each other. His family, his upbringing, how he came into money, all of it has been told more than once and differently. Grandpa's got a version of the same issue, and it's worse, because his is anchored to something real. Abe Simpson served in the Second World War. That's central to who he is. There's a whole episode built around his old unit and the treasure they buried. But a man who fought in that war would be over 100 now, and Grandpa is not over 100. And the show has quietly stopped being specific about it, which is what happens when you attach a character to a fixed historical event inside a story that never moves forward. Either the character drifts away from the event, or the event has to slide, and the show has done a bit of both over the years. Homer's the interesting one though, because his age problem is tangled up with a characterization problem, and there's an episode that tries to fix both at once. Homer is the one. Season 12. It turns out Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, and when it's removed, his intelligence jumps dramatically. And when it's put back, he goes back to being Homer. Now that's a very funny episode, and it's also a piece of engineering. Because by season 12, a lot of people had noticed that Homer wasn't the man he'd been in season 2. He'd got louder, less competent, more selfish, more prone to doing extraordinarily stupid things purely because the plot needed something stupid to happen. That drift is the single most argued about thing in the show's history after the Skinner business. And Homer hands the audience an explanation for it, not directly and not officially. But it sat there. If you want a reason why this man is the way he is, here's a physical object in his skull. I've got mixed feelings about that, and I'll say them plainly. As a joke, it's brilliant. As a piece of continuity repair, it's slightly too convenient, and it has the same slightly desperate quality as the Marvin Monroe explanation from earlier. The show noticing a problem and producing a reason rather than a fix. But it's also the sort of thing only a show with this much history can do. You can't retroactively explain a character's decade-long drift unless the character has been drifting for a decade in front of an audience who noticed. That episode couldn't exist in season 3. It needed the mistake to have already happened, which is the thought I want to leave the section on. Some of the best things this show has done came out of it having got something wrong first. The school got a canonical repaint because it kept changing color. Monroe got a book deal because he came back from the dead. Homer got a crayon because he'd stopped being clever. And the Poochie episode, which is one of the best half hours anyone has produced about television, exists because the show had an audience of people who complain. The errors aren't separate from the show. In a few cases, they became it. Somebody on one of the databases has asked a question I've been thinking about ever since I read it. The question is, which episodes feature the howling dog? Not a character, a sound effect. There is a particular dog howl that gets used on this show, typically over an exterior shot of a building, usually at night, as a bit of atmosphere. And somebody has noticed it turning up often enough that they've gone looking for a list of every episode it appears in. Nobody has answered it, as far as I can tell. I love that question because it points at something we haven't really covered yet, which is reuse. Not errors exactly, but the thing sitting right next to errors, and arguably the cause of a fair number of them. Because a show like this could not possibly be made from scratch every week. There isn't the time, there isn't the money, and there'd be no benefit. so the production runs on a library. Sound effects live in that library. That howling dog has presumably been sat on a shelf since about 1990, getting pulled out whenever a nighttime exterior needs a bit of texture. Same with the door creaks, the car engines, the various background murmurs of a crowd. There's a finite set of them, and they've been in rotation for decades. Backgrounds live in that library too, and this is the bigger one. The Simpsons living room, the kitchen, the Krusty Burger, Moe's, the plant, the classroom. Each of those has a set of established angles that get reached for constantly, because redrawing a room from a fresh angle costs an enormous amount of work for something the audience will accept without noticing. And that's exactly how you end up with a picture of infant Maggie hanging on a wall in a flashback set before her birth. Somebody needed the living room. They took the living room. The living room came with everything in it, including a photograph of a child who hasn't been born. That's the reuse and the error being the same event. There's no separating them. The character library works the same way. All those background townspeople, the ones filling out the courtroom and the crowd at the gorge and the queue at the Quickie Mart, come out of a set of established designs that get placed as needed, which is efficient, and which is also why two Ralphs ended up in the same huddle, and why a lawyer got to sit and watch himself work. I mentioned earlier that the errors cluster at the edges of frame rather than the middle. This is the underlying reason. The middle of the frame is bespoke. The edges are assembled from stock. Now, here's the part that I find quite lovely about all of this, and it's a bit of a reframe. We've spent the whole video treating consistency as the standard and inconsistency as the failure. And for a lot of what we've covered, that's fair. A wrist cast on the wrong limb is just wrong. But reuse is why the show feels like a place. The Simpsons living room is instantly recognizable to millions of people who have never thought about it once. Moe's is recognizable. The plant is recognizable. And they're recognizable precisely because they've been drawn the same way, from the same angles, using the same assets for 30-odd years. If every episode had rebuilt those spaces from scratch, they'd have drifted. Springfield would feel like a series of similar towns rather than one town. The library is what makes it coherent, so the same system that produces the errors is the system that makes the world work. You can't have one without the other. The photograph of Maggie is on that wall because that wall is a real place in the show's imagination, and real places have things on their walls, and those things stay put whether or not the scene is set in the past. There's a related thing about the sound that I want to note before we move on because it's not talked about enough. The music on this show was, for a very long time, original. Recorded with an orchestra per episode. That's an unusual amount of bespoke work for a weekly cartoon, and it's a large part of why the classic episodes feel more substantial than they should. So you had a production that was reusing backgrounds and sound effects aggressively to save time, and then spending that saved time and money on a 35-piece orchestra, which strikes me as a decent set of priorities. Reuse the door creak, write the score. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a dog has been howling outside various buildings for the best part of 4 decades, and one person on the internet would very much like to know exactly how many times. I hope they find out. Genuinely. Right, one more section and then we're done. Let's talk about the modern era because the errors have changed and I don't think many people have noticed. The mistakes have got smaller. That's the honest summary of the last 15 years or so of this show, and it's worth spelling out. Because most conversations about modern Simpsons are about the writing and almost nobody talks about the production. Here's what's actually happened. From season 28 onwards, the domestic animation moved in-house, to Fox Television Animation, and then to 20th Television Animation working out of Los Angeles. Before that, it had been Film Roman for over 20 years, and before that, Klasky Csupo. So the show is currently being made by the same organization that broadcasts it, which is a different arrangement to almost its entire history. Then from season 33, the whole thing sits under Disney following the acquisition, which is the second time this show has changed corporate parent without changing anything the audience can see. And the errors that remain are different in character. The old ones were physical, a cell in the wrong order, a background plate flipped, paint that didn't match the sheet. Those are all gone structurally because you cannot make those mistakes with digital ink and paint. What's left is the stuff that no technology can fix, which is people forgetting things. Have a look at the examples I've used from the later seasons and you'll notice the pattern. The phones reappearing on the desks in season 21, the stadium emptying in season 17, the front door opening and closing on its own in season 17, Marge's shoulder becoming a wrist in season 21, Bart grunting with his mouth shut in season 21. Every one of those is a continuity or a scripting failure. None of them are the paint being wrong, which tells you where the weak point sits now. The drawing is fine, the drawing has been fine for 20 years. What breaks is the memory, both within an episode and across the whole thing. And that's not surprising. The memory problem gets worse every year, by definition. When there is that much material behind you, the amount of established fact a writer would have to hold in their head to avoid contradicting something is genuinely beyond any individual. It's not a matter of care, it's a matter of volume. Here's a number that puts it in perspective. As of the end of 2025, this show had aired somewhere north of 800 episodes across 37 seasons. And there's a delightful bit of pedantry in the record keeping about that, which is that the 800th episode overall, the 800th Fox episode, and the 800th production episode are 3 different episodes. 3. There is no agreement on which one it was because there are 3 defensible ways of counting, and they give 3 different answers, which is, I think, the perfect note for a video about this show's inconsistencies. You cannot even establish how many episodes there are without picking a side. Now, I want to say something about the modern seasons generally because it would be a bit cowardly to spend 2 hours on this and duck it. I don't think it's bad. I think it's a different show that happens to have the same name and the same characters, and that people who say it's terrible are mostly comparing it to a version of itself that had the best comedy writers in America in one room at the same time. Which is not a fair comparison to make against anything. The later seasons do things the classic era never did. There's more attention to the supporting cast. There's more willingness to sit in an emotional moment. The animation, as I've said, can do things that were simply impossible on cells. What it doesn't have is the density. The classic run had a joke rate that nobody has matched, and once you've been raised on that, everything else feels slow. But that's a judgment about comedy, not a judgment about quality, and it certainly isn't a judgment about the people making it now. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to for this section specifically. The database goes all the way up. Season 34 has a page, 35, 36, 37. Somebody is still watching, still pausing, still writing it down. Nobody's doing that out of obligation. Nobody's being paid for it. The people cataloging season 36 errors in 2026 are doing it for exactly the same reason somebody cataloged the upside down living room, which is that they're still watching and they still care enough to notice. That's a show doing something right, whatever anyone says about the writing, right? That's the lot. Somewhere, right now, somebody has that database open. They're on season 34, or 35, or 36, working through episodes that came out last year, checking whether a background character's watch has changed wrists. And when the next season goes out, they'll do that as well. The list goes all the way up. It doesn't stop at the golden age or at the digital changeover or at any of the points where people decided the show wasn't what it used to be. It just keeps going. There's a lot I didn't get to tonight, and I'm not particularly bothered about that because there was always going to be. The audio problems alone could fill an evening on their own. There are hundreds of them, and I picked 3. The plot holes have their own section, and I picked 4. Every single season has its own page, and I barely touched most of them. I've got a whole one planned on the Treehouse of Horror episodes specifically because those are a slightly different beast. Different animators, wilder designs, less consistency to break in the first place, and a much stranger set of errors as a result. That'll be along at some point. But the thing I keep landing on, having spent a while inside all this, is how little of it matters and how much care went into finding it anyway. None of these mistakes hurt anything, not one. The snowsuit going orange didn't damage Mr. Plow. Nobody watching that Christmas episode in 1989 came away thinking less of it because a lamp was on the ceiling. The show worked. It kept working for decades. And the errors sat there in the background the whole time, doing no harm at all, waiting for somebody with a pause button and a bit of time on their hands. Which is, I suppose, the appeal of the whole thing. It's an enormous body of knowledge about something that doesn't matter, assembled patiently by people who love it. For no particular reason. That's a good thing to have in the world. And it's a good thing to fall asleep, too. Night.